Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Peace and love, everybody. I'm Brother Ali, and this is the Travelers Podcast. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, you're certainly very welcome here. The idea of the Travelers is that we are co-travelers in the journey of life. All of us were born, and we don't remember being born. And we don't know what was happening with ourselves and with our families and with the world before we were born into it. We don't have a memory of that. But here we are, and all that stuff is impacting and affecting us. And we live life, and what we have to see with is our eyes and our face, but our eyes see everything, but the eye can't see itself. So what we use to see, we've never seen our own faces. We've only seen our faces reflected on devices or in mirrors. And then we go through this life and we're going to die. And I don't say that to be morbid. I say that because of the fact that it gives the moments of life that much more meaning. And it just reminds myself and the people that are listening that it matters, that our lives matter. And the way that we spend our lives matter, and what we give our attention to matters. The things that we choose to speak about, the things that we choose to focus on. There's so much going on, and there's so much to look at. There's so much to listen to. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to take in, and there's so much to learn and to concentrate on. And there are so many things happening. And part of what we do with our limited selves is decide, what am I going to focus on? What's going to be my priority? And the purpose of this show is the fact that we're co-travelers in the journey of life. And we're choosing to look at meaning and beauty and to search out beauty and to reflect it to one another. And so this is based on the idea of connecting with other people based on what's good and what's meaningful and what's virtuous and what's beautiful and what's positive. And it means sometimes that we have to talk about things that are ugly. And ugliness and darkness is just really deprivation. Ugliness, evil, it doesn't have power on its own. The truth is like light in the darkness. And darkness is just deprivation of light. And so if there's utter and complete darkness, it doesn't take a whole lot of light to change that situation. A little flicker of light erases the dark, like is a great song from a dear friend of mine. One little flicker of light can erase the dark. And the truth is that it only takes a little bit of light. And so often we're struggling with the things that we're all struggling with in the world, but then also part of what we talk about here is the fact that each and every one of us are struggling with the human condition. And by that, I mean, as a Muslim, the way that I understand that to be framed is that each of us is a soul. The innermost part of ourself is a soul. And that soul is the breath of the divine. It's our connection with the world of meaning. And then we also are a spiritual heart. And our heart is having certain experiences. And our heart can be in different stages. Our heart can turn back and forth. Our heart can be in a state of expansion. And we can be soaring. And that can be a state. And then our heart can also contract and constrict. And we can be in a moment of deep constriction. Our hearts can be filled with joy and love. And our hearts can also be deprived of that. And again, sadness is just the deprivation of things like gratitude and joy and recognition of beauty and what have you. So we're also a spiritual heart that's part of who we are. And we also are an intellect. We also have an intellect, and we also have an ego. The intellect is what needs to frame things in language. It's what needs a framework within which to operate. So the intellect needs ideology. The intellect needs language. The intellect needs cognitive frames so that we can think about and interact with all of the stuff that we're experiencing on an intellectual level. And then we're also an ego. And the ego is just obsessed with our own individuality. And it just demands what it wants based on the fact that I'm me and I'm important just because I'm me. And I don't care how good or bad what I'm doing is. I'm going to get what I want by all means necessary for no other reason that I'm an individual. I want it. I'm demanding it. And I'm going to get what I want. And And the ego doesn't announce itself. It usually doesn't announce itself. It's only in times of a really special type of evil where evil will announce itself, where the ego will announce itself. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that even for a righteous believer, their own ego can be like a black ant on a black rock in a dark night. A lot of times we don't see when our ego is at work. And it's one of the reasons why we need spiritual practices. It's one of the reasons that we need to be in community. It's one of the reasons that we need elders and teachers and advisors and guides and mentors to help us along the way. It's one of the reasons that we need community. It's one of the reasons we need genuine good friends that will say to us, hey, I don't think you're seeing your ego right now. But as somebody that loves you and that you know loves you, I'm telling you there's part of this that you're not seeing. You have a blind spot right now. And that's part of the purpose of what we're doing here. But we also understand that every human being is walking through this journey of life from a birth they don't remember to a death that we don't know when it's coming. We're all marching through this odyssey of life, strapped with all of these different things going on inside of us. My soul wants to be connected to God. You know what I'm saying? Or the creator, the source of all things, the source of all beauty. My heart is registering things that I don't always even understand. My intellect is constantly searching for understanding and for meaning and for framing of things so that I can interact. And then my ego is sneaking up on me at all times, trying to destroy anything good that I'm about. We're all dealing with this. And so that's what The Travelers is about. Usually I talk to people on this show because of the fact that it's really important to do. And most of the people I talk to are people that in their particular field or whatever they do, they shine in a particular way that they help light the way for others. Whether it's somebody like, Dr. Ebony that we had a couple of weeks ago, that's a therapist, a Black woman, mental health, psychologist who also, in struggling with her own relationship with food, developed a system called Food is Not Bay to become a food relationship strategist. She also developed her own business and shows people how to do that. So this is a person that doesn't have an enormous following, but Dr. Ebony is extremely helpful to the people that she is in community with. And I'm one of those people. Her podcast called Food is Not Bay helped me understand my own relationship with food. And then I talk to people like Dr. Cornel West, who's really well known for being a thought leader around the world. And I talk to people like Chuck D, who's really well known for being an iconic, cultural worker, an iconic, legendary cultural creator and curator. And then I also, I talk to all sorts of people. Last week, I talked to Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a visionary thought leader. She's a healer, she's a doula, she's a writer, and she's written all sorts of things that are just amazing. So I really recommend going back and listen to that. But what really made Adrienne one of the people in my world that speaks to me and that made her so important to me was a text that she wrote called "We Will Not Cancel Us." And in my conversation with her last week, I meant to talk about that a lot and I didn't really get around to it. I was so enthralled with just talking to her because her pen game is so ill. She comes from a world that some people might call activism, organizing, radical, leftist, progressive, woke, there's whatever you want to call that thing. And so much of what I'm saying here is in reference to what I'm about to say. But she does not operate in the normalized nomenclature or just the language of that group. She doesn't have their speech patterns. She doesn't use all the words that they use. Her words, more times than not, are going to be very unique, very particular, and very accurate, but also have a lot of life and a lot of heart and a lot of humanity in them. And that means a lot to me. I come from both that world of activism, organizing, movement. There's so many words that we could use to describe that phenomenon. And I come from that world. And when people, I've been hurt in that world. I've been traumatized in that world. I put a lot of faith. I showed up to that world with a great deal of faith, and that's part of what we're going to talk about. And I've really been damaged and hurt in that world. And the same is true in religion, particularly in Islam. And I showed up to Islam with a bunch of, and I still believe in Islam 1,000%. I live in Istanbul, Turkey, with my wife. We're both converts to Islam, and with our daughters, because of the fact that I still deeply, deeply believe in this religion. But I've been hurt in those community spaces as well. And the thing that I find is that in both, like, first of all, organizers or radicals or leftists or whatever, and religious people, they don't know how similar they are. Like, if you're only in one of those spaces, you don't realize how similar they are, because I think they feel mutually superior to each other. When you talk to a lot of deeply religious people, they're like, oh man, those activist people, we're better than them because we know the truth and so and so. And what I find, and then when I'm in organizing space, a lot of them feel like they've evolved beyond religion, and those people believe in, some forms of control and old myths and stories and all this kind of stuff. They're deeply judgmental of each other, but they're so similar. Those communities are so similar. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. But so both of those spaces, when I'm in those environments, and people are just using the speech patterns and the language of those circles, I'm always on edge, because I'm like, man, these people will probably not be able to see outside of the perspective that you get from being in that group. And I almost feel triggered by certain speech patterns even. There's certain speech patterns that sometimes Muslims do that I'm like, man, I don't know if my music gets played in here, am I still going to be welcomed here? If my wife walks in here, how's she going to be spoken to as like a Black American convert to Islam? You know what I'm saying? Who doesn't know any more Arabic than it takes to pray. I studied Arabic. That's not my wife's thing. My wife got a different set of amazing gifts that she offers to the world. But Arabic isn't one of them. You know what I'm saying? And so when she walks in a room, how's she going to be treated? If my son were to walk in this room, you know what I'm saying? The way he talks and the way he looks and the way he dresses and how would he be treated? When people are talking a certain way that makes me feel like they're not aware of how particular and peculiar they are in the world, I feel triggered by that joint. And the same is true in activism, organizing, progressive, woke, radical movement spaces. And so what I want to talk about today is sometimes I don't talk to people. Sometimes I just talk directly to you about observations that I have or thoughts that I'm having or just experiences that I'm having. And this is about a very particular one that happened in a community that I'm part of. And I want to start actually with language. So first I want to suggest, please read Adrienne Maree Brown's book, We Will Not Cancel Us, because it's incredible. She's a person that, identifies as a movement person. She's someone that identifies as an abolitionist. She's a person that also wrote a book called Emergent Strategy. She's also, she's just amazing human being. And even though I don't agree necessarily with every single way that she frames and understands things, I believe her to be a person who's honest, who's creative, and her intention is always humanity and connection and love and healing and wholeness and invitation and growth. On a heart level, I just really dig her. And then also on an intellectual level, like I said, her craftsmanship with that pen is serious business. As an MC, as somebody that works with words, like, man, these words and the way that Adrienne puts them together are next level. So this text is really about what Adrienne wrote, We Will Not Cancel Us, is basically drawing the parallels between the cultures that we've been raised in and the way that it sees policing and punitive punishment, and that being seen as like, how do we respond when someone hurts someone else? And what Adrienne and her colleagues talk about is emergent strategies, emergent strategy, transformative justice, a holistic approach to like every single one of us that does some sort of wrong or some sort of harm, those of us that are in movement, and those of us even if we don't see ourselves as movement, but we have an observation of the world as it is, and we know that something is deeply wrong. I think most of us are in a place like that. I don't think very few people are living in a world like, yeah, it's normal. This is how it's supposed to be. Most people now our assessment of what's wrong and what to do about it are different things. But I don't think any of us is looking at the world. So we're talking about people who have a vision and a dream for the world being more virtuous, more healing, more advantageous to the soul and to the body, being healed and being whole and being complete. Most of us that care about the world and that voice our opinions and that do work around trying to have some sort of impact on the world, whether it's speaking truth to power, activism, or organizing, or podcasting, or blogging, or painting, or sculpting, or working on policy, or therapy, or education, or there are people that are doing that in business. There are people that are doing that in all walks of life and in all human endeavors. There are people that are looking to try to make the world a better place. And what Adrienne reminds us is that whatever we think is wrong in the world, whatever we see as being evil, deprivation, unfit, unwell, unhealthy, unjust, unrealistic, all of these things that we see as critiques of society, every single one of us, including our people that we agree with, our comrades, our allies, our colleagues, our chosen family, our tribe, the people that we do life with and that we see we're eye to eye with and we're on the same page. All of those people, everyone in the world, the people we disagree with, they were raised in that unhealthy situation. The people that we agree with were raised in that unhealthy situation, and we were raised in that unhealthy situation. And so all the critiques that we have of the world and all of the care that we have, that people aren't getting what they need on so many levels, that's happening to us. And it's happening to the people that we're in community with. And it's happening to the people that we disagree with. And it's happening for the people that just don't give a damn about any of it. Like we're all living in whatever illness we're trying to fix. And so Adrienne reminds us of that. And then she also says that we're not going to make the changes we're looking for by people within movement, what she calls movement, what Adrienne calls movement. We're not going to make that change by whenever we find somebody has, at least in our perspective, or at least in a narrative that we've been given, at least in our perception, if we've perceived somebody to have violated that, what do we do about that and what do we do with them? Adrienne says we're not going to build that. We're not going to build the world that we're looking to build. We're not going to heal and become whole in the ways that we dream of doing so by kicking those people out. That's not the work. Even though it because of the fact that we've been raised in this culture that's so punitive that, it's very unique and peculiar to this society, that as soon as somebody has a problem, we don't necessarily look at their environment. We don't necessarily look at what might have caused this. We throw them out. We send them away and we tell them like, you're not part of us anymore. I would also really suggest reading The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. There are so many texts that we can look at on this, but We Will Not Cancel Us is not difficult. It's not a difficult read, but it's a really thorough, rich, dense read. You can sit with all that stuff for a long time. And I want to give a shout out to my dear brother, the producer of this podcast, Brendan, BK1, who, I'm partially blind. I'm an albino, and so I can't sit down and read a book. I really wanted to read this one. And Brendan knew that, and it's not available on audiobook yet. And BK1 sat down over the course of like 2 or 3 days and read this entire book to me on private audio messages. So shout out and much love to BK. So I start with like, what do we call this phenomena that I'm about to talk about? Most people call it cancel culture. I've heard people refer to it as accountability culture. I've heard people talk about this phenomenon of, I'll describe it here in a second, but they've also talked about it as like a reckoning, a public reckoning. But basically what we're talking about, there's not even a word for it that I think is good. And so oftentimes what I seek to do is to really, what also I see Adrian doing is to not use the common language, because that language is oftentimes so loaded. If you say cancel culture, it sounds like you're blaming it and like you're completely denying any worth or any understanding of why these things happen. And I'm not in that position. Like, I don't deny the impulse or sometimes even that this phenomenon might be the right strategy or it might be the right thing to do. I certainly don't deny the desire for the truth to be told, and for people that have suffered to not be gaslit, to not be, to not deny them their reality and their experience, and for the community to just, not recognize them. So on a certain level, I want to really acknowledge that I understand the reason for why these things happen. And when you say cancel culture, it sounds like you're denying all of that. It sounds like you're throwing out the entire reality, including its motivation, including its inspiration, including its the best of its intentions. Like, I don't want to write anything or anyone off without thinking about and considering the best of its intentions. Even if I disagree with somebody, it's like, okay, well, what's the best thing that they could be intending? In the Islamic tradition, we have what we call husnul dhan, which means whatever I don't know about somebody else, I want to assume the best. And it's a spiritual practice to do that, to figure out what's the best way that I can fill in the gap here and give somebody the benefit of not only the doubt, but just the benefit of not knowing. Like, what has this person been through? What could possibly be the best of their intentions? So when I say cancel culture, it's like, it's not even a good language, and that's not even a good word. I also want to say at the beginning of this that I'm talking about something that happened a couple of years ago in a community I was part of. And I'm talking about it now because of the fact that I really feel on a heart level, I no longer have any malice or hurt or certainly revenge in my heart. I don't have any malice for anybody. I don't think I have an axe to grind. I don't think I'm trying to get revenge. And over my whole career, I have never spoken specifically about anyone. And it's not that I haven't been wronged. It's not that I haven't disagreed with people. I have not dissed anybody. On my first interview that I ever gave, when my first 12-inch came out, I was on tour, and I got a call from my folks that were handling stuff for me, and they said, somebody wants to interview you on the phone. And it was my first time ever doing an interview for my music. And I was like, yo, for real? So I had to borrow somebody's cell phone. I didn't have a phone. I didn't own a phone. I had to borrow somebody's phone, and I sat in this 15-passenger van. I'll never forget it, outside a venue in Omaha, Nebraska called So Cold Underground. And I gave my first interview ever. And somebody was asking me about Room with a View, my first 12-inch. And we had this conversation, and then I'm thinking the conversation is over, and I just start shooting the breeze with this person that's asking me questions, and we just start sharing our opinions about stuff. And without being wise to the way that this stuff works, I shared a negative opinion about some people in the underground hip-hop scene at that time. And I'm thinking I'm just talking to another hip-hop enthusiast. Like, this person obviously knows what they're talking about. So I talked about that, and it ended up getting printed in the story. And it led to a falling out between me and this group of people. And folks around us started choosing sides and all this kind of stuff. And I might have tried to, and I think I tried to clarify with a post on a blog, in a message board. And it just wasn't helping. It just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And people around me, lost friendships because of it. And I just started to realize, and I made a promise to myself, I'm never going to speak about somebody in particular by name. Even if someone if I feel like they've done me wrong, even if I feel like I do not want to implicate people. And another reason for that is because of the balance that the Islamic tradition gives us. Allah says in the Quran that Allah doesn't love for people to give bad news publicly or to speak about people publicly, especially if something is done privately between people. Allah doesn't love for that to be spread publicly unless there's been an injustice. And this is really the question, though. But then who determines what's an injustice and what's a personal thing that happened between people? So there's a balance there. And then there's also the reality that in the Islamic tradition, there are certain things that are considered to be human rights that must be protected. And one of those things is honor. A person's honor is a human right. We believe that in the Islamic tradition. And every person has the right for their honor to be intact and for their honor to not be betrayed. And it's one of the things that I've struggled with in my music, because some of my music is extremely personal. And there are those in the Islamic tradition that would listen to things that I've said and revealed about myself, and they would say, you've dishonored yourself, and you don't have the right to do that. A person doesn't even have the right to dishonor themselves. So there's a tension there, and there's a constant navigating that I have to do in moving forward with that. And then also I've said things about my family members. I've said things about people in my life that some of them are true. Some of them certainly feel true to me, and they were my assessment at the time. It's what I was experiencing. They were my truth in that moment. And so I'm making music because I want to be deeply personal. I want to really deeply connect. I want to use my art to explore what's going on in me and share it with people and try to foster connection based on that. And the music that I love is about those moments. And so there's tension there for me, even when I'm talking about my life and my life's journey. And I know that I've had people in my life that have been like, yo, I wish you wouldn't have said that. Not that it's not true, but there's somebody in my life that was on drugs, and, I was congratulating them for being clean and getting off of drugs, but they were messing, it was crack. And I said, so-and-so was able to, and the person said and I thought I was celebrating them. And I thought that everybody in their life knew this, but they came to me and they're like, yo, some of the children in our family don't know that I struggled with that. And it's not, you didn't have the right to say that. And I have to say that's true. So much of this is really me in that balance and in that tension, and recognizing it in the world. So I don't speak, and even when I talk about this, I will not speak about anybody, and my intention is to not speak about anyone else in a way that it'll be known who I'm talking about. My goal here is to share experiences. I want to share an experience of something that happened because I think it may be helpful. And then I want to share my observations of it because those might be helpful. And then at the end, I'm going to share personally what it felt like to me and what it feels like to me. The other thing that I want to say is that I can't speak for anybody else, and I won't speak for anybody else. It's not my job to speak for or on anyone else. So when we talk about cancel culture, it's like, well, what are we talking about? And really, I think, there's a greater phenomenon of people talking about things that happened between them and another person in a private setting, speaking about it publicly. And the idea is that people are doing this because of the fact that this is a person in power. This is a person who has power and they have a platform, and their platform is part of what is allowing them to harm people, that they're actually abusing people. So there's a story about, a big movie executive, and, this person who's ended up being convicted of, raping multiple women in multiple states, and so there's a variety of people that talk about their experiences. And I read Selma Hayek's story, and Selma Hayek is a juggernaut. I mean, amazing, like an incredible human being, incredible artist, incredible in her field. And she talked about dealing with this person and also her struggle that he was trying to shut her down. And he was trying to shut down this passion project of hers, Frida, which is incredible. This is extremely important. You know what I'm saying? My wife is a Latina woman, and Frida means a lot to our family. And I actually went and visited her home, which is where she's buried, the same way that I do for great people in the Islamic tradition. You know what I'm saying? Like, I visited her space. Like, she means a lot to us. And that film, you know, in a lot of ways, someone could compare that film to Malcolm X. And I know what Spike Lee had to go through to get Malcolm X made, you know, and also what you know, she had to go through to get that movie made, which is incredibly powerful. And so many times there are cases like that, you know, but it's become something else in a lot of ways, and it's become extremely prevalent to do that. So if I say cancel culture, I'm using that language for a particular, just because of a shorthand, but I'm almost using that for lack of a better term. You know, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, you know, and I struggle to like organize my thoughts because I haven't spoken about this really big thing that happened to me and really to the community that I was in, more so than it happened to me personally. But when something like this happens in a community, you know, it happens to everyone. So first I want to give some background. And where do I begin? You know, I haven't talked about this really publicly at all. And so where do I want to begin? So I moved around a lot as a kid, and then I moved to Minneapolis when I was 14, turning 15, to North Minneapolis, you know, which is a historically Black neighborhood. And when I lived there in the 90s, it was certainly almost entirely Black. And I've always been a hip hop artist from the time that I was really young. I think it's really important, if you want to know more about me and my own journey, then the first episode of this podcast is called The Opening. It's 2 hours long, but that's where I really spell out and lay out a lot of kind of my life and where I'm coming from. Moved to Minneapolis. That's where I became a Muslim, became an imam in the community of Muslims in North Minneapolis. I helped to build the mosque there. I gave some of the first Friday sermons there, married people, buried people, officiated over, you know, weddings and births and people converting to Islam and all sorts of things. I did a lot of interfaith work, did a lot of outreach work, did a lot of feeding and clothing people, and all sorts of stuff that I did in that role. Eventually, you know, I became aware of this hip hop community, and Minneapolis is a very, very small city. My observation living there and then also traveling around the world is that Minneapolis is a really small town that feels like it's a big city. And that might sound condescending, and I really don't mean it that way. But Minneapolis it's a city, but it's in the middle of a big forest. You think about everything in every area is like, you know, you got Wisconsin to one side, you know, to the south you got Iowa, and then you got the Dakotas. And you have to drive for 6 hours or between 6 and 8 hours to get to a metropolitan city. To get to Chicago, you have to really go a long way. So Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities, is kind of like this little town in the middle of a big kind of forest. And it feels like a big city because there's not another big city to compare itself to you got to go really far to do that. And so when you're in a small town like that, when you're in a small town kind of vibe, everything that happens feels enormous because it's the biggest thing that you're aware of. So in the Twin Cities, we had, in almost like the musical generation, the cultural generation before us, we had Prince and Morris Day and the Time. And, you know, you had some punk rock stuff that was happening, Dillinger 4, and others, really dope musical stuff. And then the generation after that, you had more R&B stuff. You had Mint Condition and Next. That was the big thing. In terms of hip hop, you basically had a small collective, which was Rhymesayers Entertainment, that started out as a collective of artists that just did shows together, supported each other. Every time they did, you know, they would pool their money. They would all do shows together. They would take that money and they would use it to invest in pressing up somebody's album or a mixtape. And then they would sell that tape. They would take the money from that tape and they would put that into making T-shirts. And then they would sell those shirts and they'd put that into making somebody else's album. And then they would put their money together. And they built slowly like that over time. I wasn't there at the founding of it. They built slowly over time to the point where they had a radio show, where anybody could come up and play their music. All of the other like serious hip hop artists could come up, and they also created a platform for other artists, for the whole scene, to come up there and play their music. They also opened a record store called Fifth Element. And in the record store, you could come in, and if you were a serious artist that pressed up your music, you could sell it in there on consignment. And then they also did events. There were open mics where you could go in there and the established artists on that label would be in there teaching people how to do this thing and encouraging them and creating opportunities for them. They also did shows, hosted shows starting in small little venues, coffee shops and things like that. And always it wasn't just their artists that they put on. They also put on other artists. And then they eventually did spots at the iconic First Avenue nightclub, which before that had stopped doing hip hop shows. And so this group of people went in there and did that. Something else to know about, and opened that stage up to other people, and that was the original sound set. It also grew to the point where Soundset became a festival that started out in the parking lot of the Metrodome where the Vikings used to play, with artists, underground hip hop legendary groups that the people that work in the office and other artists could just call on the phone. So it was like these legendary groups. LP was playing and A$AP Rock was playing and Little Brother was playing and Dilated Peoples were playing, and then the artists from the roster and other local artists that weren't on the label. But that actually grew into being the biggest all hip hop festival in the United States, in the country, the Soundset Festival. It got to the point where, I might be getting some of the names wrong, but I mean Lil Uzi Vert and Snoop Dogg, and and even on that platform, there was a stage that was dedicated to local artists, and they really were encouraging and had a lot of local artists, more so than any other big hip-hop festival. And then those artists also started going on tour and bringing other artists that weren't necessarily on the label to also go on tour, to also be exposed to the broader scene and the broader kind of like national and global hip-hop scene. So artists who are just starting out and maybe building a buzz in the Twin Cities started going on tour with these artists from the label. One of the things that I think people might not know or maybe lost sight of is the fact that Rhymesayers was founded by a group of guys in the mid-90s. I think it was formed formally in 1995 by people who are mixed race. Everyone there was Sadiq, who ended up being the president of the label. Black Dad, White Mom. Slug and Ant and Spawn, all three of the guys that were in the original Atmosphere are black, white, and native. They're perceived to be white. Also, one of the founders was Musab. And I think that's all of the actual founders. Like I said, I wasn't there when it was founded. And there always was a really diverse kind of, it was a very diverse roster from the very beginning. You had Los Nativos coming out and rhyming in Spanish and English, and they were doing shows with the Micronauts, and there was Idea and Abilities, these young, like, white virtuoso, just amazing juggernaut kids from St. Paul doing their thing. And they always had B-boys and B-girls, and they always involved graffiti writers and artists. And they would do these amazing sets, and they were called the Rhymesayers Collective. That's when I became aware of them. And, they grew into being something that was the biggest thing that in the music scene since Prince, and Prince, I get the sense that Prince had a really big presence at one point in the Twin Cities, like the people that were working for him. And he also owned a club, and he also, had all of this, like, there's a period of like it feels like every Black person that I know of a certain age, like 15 years older than me, that had anything to do with the music industry, worked for Prince in some capacity at one point. And then at some point, I just don't know what happened to that, but it no longer felt that way. And Rhymesayers went their whole career without engaging Prince or without Prince engaging them. And Prince became this kind of figure that, as people know, was very elusive and what have you. But so aside from Prince, Rhymesayers was the biggest thing in the music industry and particularly in hip hop. And I think there's this perception of Rhymesayers that it's a white thing. And that's the case because Atmosphere, who's perceived as white, and Idea and Abilities and me, and then later on A$AP Rock and Evidence and, people, there's a number of really successful white artists that are like the white or perceived to be white or not Black artists in the underground and in the Twin Cities. And it became this really big thing, but it matters to me, and it seems to have really gotten lost in all of this, that the founders and people that own shares of that label are actually not white, and that the roster has always been very diverse, and that it now I made the choice a few years ago, to start doing my work independently. I release my own music. I'm self-managed. All of my business now is being handled by me and a team of people that I put together. And the thing about Rhymesayers is that it's so many different things to so many different people. So when some people say, and I was on that label for 20 years, and it means so many different things when you say that, And the way that I see it is that we have a group of friends. We also have a community of music and what that music means. And then you have a business reality. And it can be, I think it really got lost of like which part is which. And so I'll just say at this point, since I mentioned it, that my music catalog is still there, that I still love everybody there. I'm still, on a heart level, I love those people. And musically, I still make music with those people. And the music that I made there is true and will always be true to me. On a business level, like business is something that's happening in the moment. Like business is about how are we going to structure this thing? How are we going to move? What do we want to do? What are the things we want to focus on? What are the different apparatuses that we're going to use to carry out what we want to do? Business is a very different thing. And so in a business sense, I chose to start doing my thing independently. And so people may notice that the things that I've released in the last couple of years are under Travelers Media, which is, what I created along with Brendan BK1 and a small crew of people, a small team of people that work to do. So I'm handle my own business now, and I release my own music now. And we'll get to some more about that in a second. But it's important to know all of this as the backstory. And then with all of this as the backstory, Rhymesayers, the label, and also the folks that throw the festival, announced that they were no longer going to do the festival, that the festival was on hiatus. And that festival, Soundset, not only was it the biggest thing in the country, but I mean, it was the biggest thing in the music scene. Local artists knew that it was their chance to be on stage on the same festival with whoever you like in hip hop. I mean, literally all parts of hip hop were invited to be part of this thing. So you got, Bamboo played it, Flatbush Zombies and Snoop and Lauryn Hill and on down the line. We could just name so many. Nas played it. I lose track, you know what I'm saying? Black Star played it. So many people played this festival that you could be on the same festival as them. And also Sway, the great hip hop journalist, icon, cultural curator, was the host. And they would open up their store, The Fifth Element, and then later went to Ice House and opened up the Ice House. And anybody that could rap could go up there, and Sway would broadcast live on his show. And you could go up there and spit on the show and for Sway. So it was this major kind of like plug for people. And so right before this thing happened on Twitter, that it was announced that wouldn't be there anymore, or that would be on hiatus indefinitely. I don't know if the plan is to bring it back. I don't know that. I was never part of planning that festival. The other thing is that the record store that had been the place, like I said, where people met and congregated and could sell their products and all this other public service kind of thing, or this communal kind of space that label opened up, was no longer was closed. So the store closed. So you basically had the ways that the music community benefited directly and engaged Rhymesayers directly. Those things were no longer. Then along with that, you got the pandemic. This is in the beginning of the pandemic. So people are in their houses. People are not in space with each other and don't know when they're going to be in space with each other again. And I think that that's a really important part of understanding the backdrop of what happened. And then also right immediately after that, George Floyd was murdered by the police. And then we had the uprising. And the uprising in Minneapolis was people taking to the streets. And this was not something that was conducted by the organizers and activists of the Twin Cities. You know, it's important to know that these were people that just took to the streets. And we all know, if we were watching the news, that there was a number of things that happened. One of the most iconic things that happened in that uprising, is that a police precinct was burned down during that time. And people felt there was this rush of feeling feeling powerful. And I was, going on Instagram Live during that time, and those lives are still on my Instagram. You can see what I was saying about that stuff at the time that it was happening. You can also see, I think we also put that on the YouTube page as well, the Brother Ali YouTube page. I believe all of those are there for people that want to see what I was saying during that time. But that was a time when when some section of the people burned down that police station and felt like, okay, now we're being heard. And there's a truth to that. Would that attention have been given to that case and the police reform things that have happened since then and the conversational shift since then? Would that not have happened were it not for things being burned down? Look at American history, and America has never given up its white supremacy, its system of white supremacy and keeping white people in power and black people down. I mean, slavery wasn't abolished until there was the Civil War. I mean, we just have to acknowledge that in the Constitution of the United States, I'm saying that the 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution of the United States isn't talking about it. It was talking about Black Americans, talking about the children of enslaved Africans, and the country being, essentially built, and the economic power of America overnight, really has its roots in and cannot be separated from the reality of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, the legacy of enslavement, etc. This isn't critical race theory. This is the one of many truths about our country, about America. And those things have historically not really seriously changed without some sort of violence. I mean, America went to war with itself and almost wasn't a country anymore because of the issue of slavery. And hundreds of thousands of American relatives killed each other. And it's not that long ago. And it's really important to know that. And so many of the things that have happened, even we look at the civil rights movement, there was violence. It's just that the nonviolent part of the civil rights movement was subjecting itself to white violence. But there was violence. People were being attacked by dogs and shot with fire hoses, and bricks being thrown at Dr. Martin Luther King in the North, in Chicago. So this is the backdrop of understanding what was happening in the Twin Cities. So initially, like right after, on the heels of that, there was a conversation that was starting to happen on Twitter about race in the Twin Cities hip hop scene. Specifically, the fact that white artists or non-black artists or artists that are perceived to be white have been, since there was a prominent scene that's been accepted kind of by the broader community in the Twin Cities. So we're not talking about Disco T and Dan Speak and Travatron and you know what I'm saying, Truth Maze and OSP and Muja Messiah and Omar and like all of these, Knowledge MC and like all of these people that were around and thriving as a culture and doing their thing. You know what I'm saying? Big shout out to Stage One and big shout out to Buddha Tai. And like, if I start naming names, I'm going to forget people that I don't want to forget. But shout out to that whole community of people, KLC, all the people that were doing hip hop and being striving. We're talking about when the broader community in Minnesota, there's a reason that Soundset was the biggest hip hop festival in the country. And it's because hip hop became the predominant music in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota. It became the big music. And that happened because of these non-black or artists that were perceived to not be black becoming these prominent artists. And so there was a conversation about that. And then there was also, people started coming forward and talking about their experiences. Women specifically were talking about their experiences with artists, with DJs, with rappers, with video directors, with people that worked at radio stations, with photographers, with keyboard players and musicians and singers. And, it wasn't limited to any one segment, but it basically was non-white artists talking about their experiences in that community and women talking about their experiences of interacting with these men. I want to pause right there and just talk about what those two topics mean to me and the role that they've played in my life. You know what I'm saying? I think it's really important for me to say that like those have been key primary focuses of my career from the very beginning. Not only talking about the music that I've made, my first album, Beneath the Outer Layer, The Train is Black. You just don't disrespect the people that laid the tracks. You love this human expression and they gave you that. So the least you can do is try and pay them back. We talking about They asked me if my genes tie me to those that despise me, made a living killing the ones that inspire me. I'm not just talking about singing and dancing. I was taught life and manhood by black men. So I'm a product of that understanding. Small part of me feels like I am them. Does that make me a liar? Maybe. But I don't want the white folks that praise me to think they can claim me. Because you didn't make me. You don't appreciate what I know to be great, yet you relate to me. And that frustrates me. And what can I say? Because I know that I benefit from something I hate. But make no mistake, our connection ain't fake. It's never too late to clear off the slate. If you follow my tape, you know what I'm about. If something comes up, then it must come out. That's my second album. Uncle Sam Goddamn, talking about the race thing. And on and on and on throughout my whole career, talking about race. To my primarily predominantly white fans, speaking as a person who also is European American, like what are we doing and how are we understanding and processing our role in this whole thing? That's been a big part of what I've talked about. Also, sexual violence has been a key focus of mine from the very beginning. You know what I'm saying? On my first album, you hear like a true story about a woman who, one of my neighbors, that he's beating up his, they're having domestic violence. I can hear it. So I go and try to talk to him. It escalates into a fight. That's a true story. And then the police come. Somebody called the police. Don't know which fight they were talking about, but they came and I ended up being the one in handcuffs. And then onto a song that I made called Baby Girl, which is about what it's like. I wanted to talk about sexual violence because the women in my life have experienced this reality, and the women in the world have experienced this. Almost everybody. I mean, almost every woman that I've ever known deeply, intimately, with almost no exceptions, have shared with me that they've had experiences with sexual violence In particular, I made this song called Baby Girl, where like I knew that this was going to be it's a primary focus in my life. It's one of the main things in my life. So there's got to be a song about this. And I really took the Us album, my third album that song is on, talks about, and really that whole album was shaped by me trying to figure out how to write that song. Because like I didn't want to tell that song third person. I didn't want to tell somebody else's stories. I don't pretend to speak for other people. I speak for myself in the first person. So that song is about what it's like to be in a loving, intimate relationship, long-term relationship with somebody who is a survivor of intense, prolonged sexual violence, and what it's like to witness somebody, to love somebody, and to be in that journey, that healing journey with them in so much as anyone else can be when you're not the one that it happened to. You know, and that particular song is one that I perform every night that I perform. And there's people around the world that have those lyrics tattooed on them. It's one of my, I would say it's Forrest Whitaker, Uncle Sam, Goddamn, and Baby Girl are probably the songs that I won't do a show without doing those three songs. It's one of the main songs. So, you know, these are things that I've worked on. Also from the very beginning of my own career, you know, as independent artists, what we're limited in terms of what we're able to do for other artists. You know, we're not music moguls. You know, I've never been in the big music industry, so it's not like we have the ability to pull the trigger or something like that. But what we can do is share our platform with other artists to say like, yo, I have a stage. There are people that want to see me, and I get to choose. Not only do I get to choose who shares that stage with me. And so I've really, from the very first time that I ever headlined a tour, I've brought women with me on tour to make sure that they have an opportunity to share that stage and to do their thing. And especially in the beginning, that was a huge financial investment. You know, and I think people think that because of the fact that we are able to do this thing in a sustained way, it means that we must be wealthy. And I'm not here to speak for anybody else, but I'm not. When the pandemic hit, I was broke. You know what I'm saying? And there will be people that don't like me when I say this that will laugh at me, and they'll be like, oh man, what a sucker, and you bad with money and blah, blah, blah. You don't understand. If you haven't done this thing for a living, the overwhelming majority of artists end up broke. That 95% of artists end up broke. It's just the reality of doing what we do for a living. And most of us are broke while we're doing it. Sometimes you have moments where you're not. Part of why my family moved to Istanbul is because I couldn't afford to live in Minneapolis anymore. You know what I'm saying? That's just a reality. I was in a place where the only money that was reaching me was money from me doing shows and speaking engagements and teaching classes. So if I wasn't in a place speaking or teaching or performing, I wasn't going to make it. And I had to do it almost every day for many years just to keep my family alive. I've also been married since I was 17 years old. You know what I'm saying? So I've my entire adult life, I've had dependents. I've had people whose food, shelter, clothing, and security and insurance and healthcare and all of their needs are supplied by me. And I'm a traditional Muslim man, where that's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to do all of that. Women can choose to go to school or not. That's their choice. They choose to work or not. They choose whether to contribute financially to the household or not. And if they do, it's considered charity. But women have the right to be maintained by their husbands. That's what we believe in Islam. And so from the time I was 17 years old, I always cared for other people and provided for other people. And that's just always been my reality. And so, you know, I also invested a lot of money in making sure that these artists that come out with me do so in a way that's dignified and where they're living at the same standard that I'm living at. And the people that work for me also work for them. So BK1 was my DJ while we were doing a lot of that stuff, and he also DJ'd for these artists for free, no charge. and help them build their set. And I brought out a sound engineer and tour manager who also did their sound and was engineering for them. I also covered their flights and their hotels and paid them, and also defended them when there were maybe openers who would come out first and play before them, who were like, I have more listeners than this person. I'm more established than this artist. And I have to stand up and say, like, listen, me and Brendan, me and BK are creating a space for these women, because we see that as something that we need, not just because we're doing it as charity for other people. We need for our culture to also have the contribution of women, because that's the hip hop that made us love hip hop. I need there to be MC Lyte in the game. I need there to be Queen Latifah in the game. I need there to be Moni Love in the game. I need Boss. I need Yo-Yo. I need all of the, you know what I'm saying, Ladybug Mecca. I need all the people that I grew up listening to. Like I need the whole family to be in this cultural thing. And so we're going to do whatever we can do to make sure that happens. And as an independent artist, that's all you can do. And that's really doing a lot, you know what I mean? But it's important to us to do that. We also have the reality that, so the music that I've created, the focus that I've chosen to have, and then also speaking truth to power and the consequences that come along with that. So the first time that I went on TV, the first time, and the only time, I had one round of doing the TV shows. So I did Conan O'Brien and Jimmy Fallon and a few other ones. I did Uncle Sam Goddamn, and I made sure that we brought out Mint Condition. So I'm doing Uncle Sam Goddamn with a black band, and that's what was going to be. And I was told, like Stokely from Mint Condition, his father is Mahmoud El-Khati, the leading black historian and public intellectual in the Twin Cities. We call it Elder Mahmoud. Stokely told me, man, this is a very bold move you're doing. Check out the episode on the podcast. One of the early episodes of this podcast is me talking to Stokely from Mint Condition. But Stokely says, listen, man, if you choose to do this, unless you blow up between now and when you want to come back, unless you blow all the way up, they might not invite. They're probably not going to invite you back, because these people are tuning into these shows late at night because they want to just take a break, and they want to laugh. They want to see something silly. They want to see their favorite celebrities, shooting the breeze. It's lighthearted. It's funny. You come on here, you know what I'm saying? Suddenly they're laughing and all this stuff, and then suddenly there's this big bald albino Muslim dude with Muhammad Ali on the back of his jacket and an all-black band talking about Uncle Sam Goddamn. Conan O'Brien's going to get letters about this. And unless you blow all the way up, like unless you become Jay-Z by the next time you want to come back here, you're not going to come back. So I said, what do you think I should do? And he said, we should do it. We should do the song. And we did. That's what we did. And when it was time for us to be invited back, we weren't. There was interest. The people that worked at the shows seemed like they were really interested. We had dope ideas. I had all these celebrities, these really cool people that said they would come back and play with me. One was going to be, Tom Morello was going to come and do one from Rage Against the Machine. Cornel West and Jackson Brown had signed on to do one on another big show. And when we pitched people these ideas, they were really excited, and they called us back and say, no, I'm sorry, you can't come on the show. Uncle Sam Goddamn was the first hip hop song ever performed on Iranian television, and it's illegal to do that. And that was the case because I was in Iran participating in, performing at, speaking at a conference about police brutality towards Black Americans, towards Black folks in America. And I was there with, people from the Nation of Islam and like all of these big organizations and very, very serious radical activists. I chose to do that because Paul Robeson and people that came before me did it. It's a way of using one's platform to basically say, like, if the country that I live in and the country I'm a citizen of is going to point its finger at other countries and their human rights violations, one of the things that we can do is to travel to those countries and say, look, you have your own human rights violations. If you suddenly care about human rights, let's talk about human rights. And it's one of those things that comes with consequences. And for years since I did that, The FBI came to my house on my birthday and banged on my door and scared my daughters and tried to come into my home and questioned me on the doorstep of my house on my birthday a couple years ago. And I mean, that's a traumatic event. And they were talking about me going to Iran. And for years traveling, me, my family, my wife, my children, harassed, pulled off of planes, questioned on airplanes, our bodies and our things all searched, antagonized, asked all these crazy questions, going through hours of questioning, trying to get us to lose our patience, trying to get us to break emotionally. This stuff happening to my wife. You know what I'm saying? One of the people that worked at Rhymesayers actually was questioned because one of the times they were jamming me up and they said, "Oh, this is just totally random." It's like, man, don't gaslight me. This isn't random. They said, "Well, we're just doing this because somebody else purchased your flight." I said, "No, you're not. People buy flights for other people all the time. Businesses buy flights. I'm a musician. Promoters buy my flight all the time." Well, who's your promoter? There's different promoters for every show. Well, who's your promoter? Like, I don't think you understand how the music business works. You're maybe asking about my manager. Yeah, who's your manager? I'm sorry, I don't have anything to hide, but I don't say other people's names. Because the second I say someone else's names, then they become part of your investigation. It's public record who my manager is. And so they went and found it the very next time that one of the people on the management team at Rhymesayers went on vacation. They gave him and his family 4S, which means the highest security scrutiny. And he hit me up and was like, "Yo, man, I just went through it. Like they harassed me. They went through all my stuff. They treated me bad." It's yeah, man, I'm sorry. That's what I've been dealing with, So, and I could go on and on and on and on and on. But one of the things that I want to talk about is not only speaking truth to power, not only, saying these things in ways that may be detrimental to myself. I also was removed from a tour. I was supposed to go on tour with, these big artists, and it was supposed to be sponsored by a big company. At that moment when I was supposed to make that transition to being on a bigger level, the fact that we were pushing Uncle Sam goddamn, we were told straight up, like, you're being removed from this tour and they're going to give it to somebody else and you're not going to do it. The Department of Homeland Security seized money from me when I was in Australia. Our money got wired back. I was doing shows. The money got wired back to the bank account in Minnesota and it got seized. And I had to get on the phone with Department of Homeland Security. And they let me know that it was because of Uncle Sam goddamn. And none of the big TV stations, networks played it, except for P. Diddy's network, Revolt. They played it. But it was right when YouTube was a new thing and in the culture. And it was one of the first independent hip hop videos to get millions of views. And so it spread that way. And so it's not only those kind of things, but also I want to talk about specific organizing that I did. When I was in the top position in the Twin Cities, or one of the top positions in the Twin Cities in terms of being a hip hop artist, I've always been involved in activism and organizing, which means not only going out on the streets and protesting or tweeting about things, but to actually organize other people around strategically building power for communities that are being kept out of power and trying to shift the things that happen using the organized collective power of people together, using community power to aim and to be objective and strategic. I've studied it. I actually went to classes to study them. I've traveled to study what organizing is about, different strategies, different approaches, different frameworks, different ideologies, different understandings of and schools of thought around organizing specifically. And so when it came time to do that, I did it. I got arrested doing it. There was a time when we were working on, and again, me trying to bring the community of mostly people, European American people from the dominant culture that care. Like, these are people that show up and listen to my music. I made it known early to them that for me to say these things in my songs means that white people who want to avoid the topic of race aren't going to really be able to be comfortable listening to my music and seeing me perform and seeing me speak. And it's just going to be a necessary topic for me because of the fact that I'm here because this is the community and culture and world of meaning and spiritual tradition that made me who I am. So this isn't a charity thing for me. Like, I'm doing this because I believe this is necessary for my own wellness as a human being, for my own soul. It's not a charity for somebody else. It's not to look good. And it certainly isn't helping me with my audience because the white listeners that didn't want to deal with this stuff stopped listening to me, and they told me about it. And I saw it happen over time, especially in a certain period. Like, there were just people that are like, man, I don't, and they threatened me. And I've gotten very serious death threats throughout my life and other types of threats. And I get them to this day. And some people could say you don't have to take them seriously. There was a person who was threatening me at one point, who was threatening me and another person, and they actually tried to harm that other person and maybe even kill them. And they went to prison for it. So these aren't just empty threats, you know what I'm saying? And so much of me talking about this stuff in the music is going to make it known, and it's going to set the table that to listen to me and to be part of the thing that I'm about, especially for these white listeners and supporters, like, these are going to be the people that are not uncomfortable at least hearing that conversation and being involved in that conversation. So when I started getting more into activism and organizing, I saw that the friends of mine that were organizing around housing injustice in North Minneapolis were connecting with the people around Occupy Wall Street. And, those were largely white youth that were going out into the streets and just occupying places. And so there was a brilliant idea in Minneapolis that, well, what if we have these occupiers come and occupy the homes of, poor people of all colors, and then, people of color whose homes are being foreclosed unjustly. And so we did a lot of organizing around that. I bought a sound system, and I would go set up at the houses and do a free concert outdoors. And then when people come, the organizers would talk, the homeowner would speak, the people that were involved already would speak. And then we would collect phone numbers, add email addresses and things like that. And I would personally go and phone bank and call all those people and email them personally, and then have them come back for the actions that we did. Real organizing, and never got a dime for any of this. I never fundraised for any of it. I never had a nonprofit organization for any of it. I never had a salary. I never asked for donations. I never did a GoFundMe or a crowd sponsor thing for me. I never saw a dime from any of that work that I did, and that was by choice because I was able to feed my family from the music, and so I just was doing that because it matters to me in my heart and soul. And so I did that work. And we got to a point where the news was covering it, and after a while they stopped. And so I made the decision, along with several other people, that, all right, I'm just going to go get arrested. And so I got arrested doing civil disobedience, and it made it difficult, even more difficult for me to travel, and it got brought up and things like that. There was another time when I got a call from a Black woman organizer friend of mine who said that the City Pages, which is the primary newspaper, the entertainment magazine, it was like the equivalent of, and I think they were actually owned by the Village Voice at one point in New York. They no longer exist, but they were the print news and online media outlet for the Twin Cities music, arts, culture scene. The City Pages was it. And this was at the height of my career and the height of my notoriety in the Twin Cities, when I was selling out multiple dates at First Avenue, selling out 2-3 nights in a row at First Avenue, and all of this stuff. I got a call from a Black woman organizer, a friend of mine, who said, there's a group of women, City Pages wrote a story about a young Black boy that was killed, hit by a stray bullet, sleeping on his grandmother's couch. And these like hipster young white writers wrote a story about this boy where they made a joke about and made light of his name possibly being related to the worst racial slur that there is about Black people. His name was Nizel. And they basically made a joke about it. And so these women were like, we are so tired and so fed up with being disrespected by this newspaper. And so I got a phone call, a group of women that we know, Black women that we know, that are not going to do civil disobedience, are headed down there and they demand answers. I was scheduled to be on the cover of that newspaper at the time. I was like, it was on the schedule. They're like, we're going to interview you. You're going to be on the cover. It's going to be this big story for this project that I had coming out in the coming months. And they've covered me many times. I had been on the cover many times before that. And they've covered me many times before that. And they know me. I personally know people up in that building. So I said, yo, come pick me up. I said, you're going over there? She said, yeah. I said, come pick me up. Went over there. The women, these like women are angry, and they locked the doors of the city pages. They locked their doors of their offices. And so people are banging on the, so I start reaching out to people in there. And they're like, what's going on? I said, what's going on is you have caused harm in the community and they're out here trying to speak to you directly about it. You need to open your doors. Like, you need to hear from the community. You need to engage them. You need to listen. Well, what do they want? I'm not the spokesperson. I don't speak for anybody but myself. I'm speaking as an artist that's been on the cover of this paper and that knows you and knows that you understand yourself to be an anti-racist person. Open these doors and talk to the people. Like, talk to the people that this has impacted. You need to come out here. You need to deal with this. And so there was a campaign, and there was supposed to be all these different things happening. And I was on their head. And I basically went to war with that newspaper, with the city pages, while I was the guy in focus. And it's not that we didn't need them. I'm saying they were, it's not that I would say, did we need them? I don't know. But their impact definitely was felt. The fact that they were covering us was definitely felt. It was one of the main things that people look to as like a moment of notoriety, it's one of the things as a musician in the Twin Cities. You want to have your sold out shows. And then one of the big moments is when you sell out First Avenue as a headliner. That's one of the rites of passage in the Twin Cities hip hop scene and music scene in general, not just hip hop. But then also, if you're on the cover of City Pages, it's a big deal. It's one of the rites of passage. It's one of the benchmarks of someone who's succeeding. And so I was in that moment. I was at the height when the focus was on me. I rode with the community. And then they said, while that was going on, they said, okay, it's time to do your interview. The date on the calendar came up. And I said, listen to me. I'm only doing this interview if the first thing we talk about is City Pages' role in engaging the community. That's what we talk about first. And you print that. So, okay, so we came and we talked about it. They released a cover story, and sure enough, that was absent. They didn't print any of that. They promised me that they were going to, well, next week, we're going to do a part 2. Like, no, this was the cover story. You lied to me. And so if you listen to an Atmosphere song called It Ain't the Prettiest, I think, I talked about it. And then I went to the other newspapers, the Star Tribune, St. Paul Pioneer Press, and talked about what was going on with City Pages. And they told me, there was somebody at that organization that said, listen, you need to know they're not going to deal with you ever again. Like, the fact that you went to the other newspapers, they see that as the biggest breach of any good relationship you had with them. And so, that was the case. And I didn't work with them anymore after that. I didn't do anything with the City Pages after that. The current radio station is a public radio station in the Twin Cities that's on FM. Some cities have these public stations. They have one in Seattle. They have, several of them in New York. Some certain cities have them. A public station that's on FM radio that plays music, and they played local music, and they played my music a lot. I was played on that station almost every day. And every time I went in there, I was speaking to them about Mint Condition, for example. They would say, wow, don't you think this music scene is so open and diverse and welcoming? And I'm like, you guys are ignoring Mint Condition. You guys are ignoring Mint Condition. These are musicians that play their instruments. They got rock songs. They got punk rock songs. They got folk songs. They got jazz songs. They're playing every style of music, and it's a black band, and they sell out arenas in cities that have large black populations. And you guys don't play them. Like, what is going on? I'm saying this on the air, and it makes them really uncomfortable. But then they came to me, the current came to me and approached me about they wanted to do, and it turns out they got a big grant to do a hip hop showcase, showcasing the Twin Cities hip hop scene. And they wanted me to be one of the headliners. And so I'm talking to this particular organizer that's putting the show together. And I'm just I'm asking, like, who else is part of this? And I realized this person in their team, which is an all-white team, it was a white woman that was at the helm of this thing at this time, was just operating in a way that didn't look like community. I could never get the full list of who else are you talking to and what are you saying to them? Who are the other people that are part of this thing? And I was suggesting other people that need to be at the table. And I was being told, like, yeah, we'll reach out to them. And then I spoke to some of those people, and I started trying to get a sense of, like, wait a minute, what is this this is a public institution. They're given tax dollars to do what they're doing. I didn't know at that time that they had received a grant to do this showcase thing. It was at a big, historic theater. And it just felt wrong to me. And so I called all of the people that I knew that were announced, that they actually made an announcement about this show. They said, we're going to do this showcase and here's who's on it. So I reached out to all of the people that were on that show. This is me as one of the headliners. And then I reached out to the people that were real organizers and artists from the community that should have been part of that. And I brought together a coalition of people, and I said, what we're going to do is we're going to tell them, none of us are playing this show that you want to do. And what needs to happen is, and I worked with this coalition of people to determine what would this look like, genuinely being for, of, and by, and a true representation of the community of people that actually do this music, that actually create this culture. First of all, Black people and Black women should be in the driver's seat. And I brought women artists, women activists, artists and activists and organizers and educators of color to the table. And I know that almost all of the artists that were invited signed on. There were a couple of artists that did not sign on. They wouldn't take that position because they were saying, like, well, we're the darling. They were some darlings of that radio station, and they didn't want to threaten that. I know who signed on and who didn't. Again, I'm not in the business of dishonoring people, revealing people, but there were some of the artists that wouldn't sign on to do that because they did not want to risk their relationship with that institution. And so we were able to bring together a coalition of people. I wasn't trying to be in a leadership role, but it was known by the people at that radio station and within that building, like Brother Ali organized the community against us, and it's certainly, like, outwardly they welcomed it and what have you. But, and we had people leave that group while we were in the midst of the talk and go start working. They took jobs behind our back, and started working at the station. And so I bring these things forward, not because of not to say, like, well, look at me, or like, these are my things. These are all things that I did because I need them. I come from the culture that created hip hop. That's who made me what I am. Not the business, not the fans, not any marketing, not any chart, not any numbers, not any institution. I was made this, first of all, this community, this wisdom, this knowledge, this insight, this spiritual connecting, this tapping into this shoreless ocean of meaning, all came from a community who also are the ones that taught and trained me from this culture. This culture being healthy is what made me who I am. And any opportunity that I have to stand on stage and for people to clap for me, or for people to give me accolades or money or attention or whatever, all of this comes from the fact that I was taught by a community and by a culture, and that's where my wellness comes from. That's where my hope comes from. That's where my sanity comes from. That's where my talent comes from. That was the training ground that trained me how to be this person that stand on the stage that can handle any group of people. That's because this community of artists trained me, and I need there to be people from all parts of the community. I need different ages. I need women up in there. I need it to be mostly Black because this is Black music. I need there to be First Nations people in there. I need there to be people in there that are from our community, so they're going to identify and have different relationships with sexuality and with identity and all that stuff. I need the whole community here because that's who made me what I am. And that's the only space where I feel sane and hopeful, and this is what's keeping me going, along with my spiritual practice. But my spiritual practice comes from that as well and is fed by it. So it's like this stuff isn't for me to be like, yo, look at me. I didn't bring a camera when I did those things. Those things aren't in my bio. I think getting arrested is in my bio. I think it says when Brother Ali isn't rocking the stage at Coachella or getting arrested, civil disobedience, he travels and studies Islam. But I'm saying, I didn't say, but I went to war with the newspaper, the biggest entertainment and culture, arts and culture, entertainment newspaper in my city. When I was in the spotlight, that's what I did because they were being disrespectful to Black women. And when I was in that spotlight, I went to war or organized against, but I not only spoke truth to power, but I organized people and was part of organizing people and took that very real stand that messes with them on the level of their jobs, that with those actual gatekeepers. Those are gatekeepers. There are people that accuse independent artists of being gatekeepers, and I think that's a pretty flimsy statement to make about an independent artist, especially one that's not part of the main music industry. But the actual gatekeepers, the people who had the decision-making power to decide whether I'm on the radio all the time on this big radio station or not, those people that made that decision, those are the people that I stood with the community in ways that made them uncomfortable and feel threatened, and did the same thing at the newspaper. So to me, that's what organizing is. That's what activism is. I would be out in the world and I would see police officers that arrested me. You know what I'm saying? Or police officers that searched me, or police officers that maced me. I also was in, spaces where stuff was going on. So I say all of that to say that when this conversation arose, these are all things that I'm like, word, let's do this. Like, let's talk about this. You know what I'm saying? These have been focuses for me. And I have to say, when I was in those spaces, I didn't see a lot of rappers there. I didn't see a lot of artists there. I didn't see a lot of, people like that. There were people that were organizers, activists. I saw a lot of career organizer activists there, or people that were just starting to get into that movement. But when I was there, there's just a few of those people who that's what they've done for a long time. But I didn't see a whole lot of them, So initially, when these conversations started to happen, I can't relate to the things that happened. First of all, or another thing is that when we started having stories of people say, particularly women saying like, I was, in an intimate space or in a relationship with, or, at a party with, or on a date with, or this artist, this photographer, this guitar player, this rapper, this video director, this station programmer, this, whoever. And you start just getting an idea and a sense for like women revealing and talking about things that happened to them, experiences that they had. I was learning about this stuff at the same time as everybody else. You know what I mean? There's a part of me that's like resentful about the fact that music and culture, I'm a Muslim and I'm trying to really be a Muslim. And it's hard for me. And like, I like being in environments that help me be a better Muslim, because I have an ego like everybody else that wants to be bad, that wants to do things that are, so I want to be in environments. That's part of why, another reason why we moved to Istanbul, because the life that we have for ourselves here, it's helping me be the person I want to be. And I'm struggling. Like, it's hard for me to do. And so when I'm in environments that aren't geared towards that, I resent it in a way. I feel defensive. I feel triggered. I don't like it. And I don't like the fact that practicing this culture and this art form means that I have to be in bars, means that I have to be in places where people are like the people think that it's sex, drugs, rock and roll. The idea that music in and of itself, that art and culture in and of itself is associated in our culture, in our society with something low and dirty. I personally think that it has its roots in the separation that happened with Black and nation and First Nation Indigenous music and the music of early immigrants, Irish, etc. That like your music is dirty and bad unless you're singing in the church. So there's this like separation of like, this is church music where you're singing for God or you're singing for America. And that is profane music where you're singing for the devil. And that's going to happen in a juke joint, in a saloon, in a honky tonk, in a dirty place where Big Mama Thornton is saying, they got snuff juice everywhere. And, we're going to cuss and fight till midnight and all that stuff. We're going to pitch a wang dang doodle all night long. Like the fact that like, why do I have to do my thing in a wang dang doodle? You know what I'm saying? Like that's a real thing for me. And I will say that in that environment, I met my wife in that environment. Like when I was touring with Atmosphere, I met my wife there. And a lot of the people that I was around met their wives there. And, and their wives were part of that early touring experience, coming and being on the road with us. And it's not to say that there was not craziness around me, especially early on. Like it took me a minute to figure out like, how do I engage with what this tour life is supposed to be as someone who's trying to hold on to my religion. And especially those early years was really challenging for me. And it's challenging for a lot of people, along with the fact that you go from being like, I went from being a fat albino Muslim dude where like, there's some people that like me at the mosque, but I'm a broke nobody. And I go from that to being on stage and suddenly there's like rooms full of people chanting my name and shouting for me and wanting to be with me and wanting to be around me, And I made a song called Electric Energy where I talk about just what it means to be on stage. The artists that are on stage pursuing sex with a lot of people, and then also the women in the audience that are looking to pursue those men. You know what I'm saying? And I don't like the fact that for me being a musician, that it means that's I'm just automatically thrust into that kind of space. But what I will also say is that when you don't party, the people that party don't do their partying around you. There are friends of yours that use hard drugs, and if you don't use those drugs, you won't know that they do it because they're not gonna do heroin around people that don't do heroin. So I guarantee you got friends that are into stuff that you don't know because they know you're not into it and they know they're not safe doing that around you. So a lot of this stuff just didn't happen around me. Like people would share space with me when it was about music, when it was about performing. I'm seeing the artist side of people. I'm seeing the most beautiful version of this person because I'm seeing the gift that they have come out of them. I'm seeing their desire to be validated. Like we all live in this isolating culture where people want to be famous because like fame is one of the only things we produce in America, and fame is the capital that we have. That's the social capital we have, because if I'm famous, I don't have to explain and justify my being. And so people have this feeling of like deep isolation. And maybe if I'm famous, then I won't be in the kind of social danger and isolation and abandonment and just this deprivation, this love vacuum that I find myself in. Maybe being famous will do that. I mean, that's one of the main people are looking, and I'm speaking as one of them. Yes, I make this music because it's my gift and it's my passion. I've given my life to it. I also want to be accepted. You know what I'm saying? Like so many of us are seeking that, and all of the different ways that shows up, including intimacy, including, suddenly you go from being a person that's never approached by women to suddenly you got all of these women that because you're the person on stage, suddenly they want to be with you, and you got to figure out immediately, what am I going to do with that? the first time that happens, it's like most of the people that are in that space that actually have that moment where like, oh man, these people are looking at me the way that I look at my heroes. These people are looking at me with this sense of awe and wonderment and bewilderment and admiration and adoration that I look at famous people with. And nobody teaches you what to do with that. You know what I'm saying? Eventually you figure it out and you learn it, and I was very grateful to have very early on connected with people like Chuck D that helped me with that and that taught me about that. But I will say that my understanding of the culture that we were in is that we're not foul dudes. We don't roll with foul dudes. That there was a lot of activity, but early on, what we understood was we're not foul dudes. And the woman that I met at the show, I've been married to for almost 20 years. You know what I'm saying? I met my wife at an Atmosphere show, my first year of touring. You know what I'm saying? And we've been together since that point. And now here we are, all these babies and all these years later. So that's what that was my relationship with that. Not to say that I didn't say things that I'm like, dude, I can't believe I said that. You know what I mean? Or I can't believe I did that. Even me being that person that's trying to hold on to the Sharia, I'm trying to hold on to Sharia law. Like, you know what I'm saying? And failing at it a lot of the time and been struggling with it. That was the way that I saw it. So people weren't doing those things around me. So a lot of it was news to me, especially the fact that they were talking about certain people. So when that conversation arose and when that idea arose, it was something that had already mattered to me for a long time. And one of the things that I know, like my wife is a therapist, and maybe I should stop saying that so much because I don't want my wife to be like an accessory to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got this and I do this and I do that and I know this person, I know that person, my wife is this. But I just say this to say that my wife is a therapist. My wife is, I would say, one of a small handful of Black women therapists in the Twin Cities. And she, her primary focus is working with women of color who have gone through trauma. And all of her clients have experienced sexual trauma and experience it ongoing. So these are all things that are really part of an active part of my life. You know what I'm saying? My wife and I, part of what we've done in our lives is we've supported each other's dreams. So, when I met my wife, I had just put out my first album. I had no money. I was a fat albino dude from Minnesota, Muslim guy who wanted to make it as a rapper. And she left New York City to move to Minnesota. Her friend wrote her a letter and was like, yo, hope you have a good time out there on the West Coast in Minnesota. Wait, what coast is Minnesota? They didn't even know where Minnesota was. She came out to be with a dude who had a kid, you know what I'm saying? And she's in New York living her best life, having fun, doing her thing. You know what I'm saying? Moved to Minnesota to support my dream and then stayed home with my child while I went out there and made this thing happen over all these years. She supported me through my dream. So that's part of why I mention her, because I'm here in large part because of the sacrifices she made and support she gave me. But then that's also reciprocal. And so I was able to support her, being the first person in her family to go to college. And she went to the best private institution that they have in our place for what she wanted to do, and they ran out of honors and awards to give her. She absolutely killed it, and then became a therapist. You know what I'm saying? And so much of my life has been around this subject in particular, has been about talking about this stuff. And one of the things that I know is the main barrier to people who have been violated, the main barrier to them healing is that people don't believe them. People in their people in our families, in our communities, in our church and mosque and in our scenes and in our workplaces and in our military and in our sports teams and in our whatever. We don't want to deal with, or we don't know how to deal with what it would mean to acknowledge that like somebody violated somebody else. We don't know what to do with that. We don't know what to do with, or we don't want to do, or what we're incapable or unwilling to do what needs to be done in response to that. And so one of the main things and main realities and main just like one of the most evil aspects of this phenomenon of sexual violence that is extremely pervasive in our culture is that people don't believe you when you try to tell your story. When you tell the truth about what happened to you, people say you're lying, they blame you, they shame you, you become the person on trial, the burden of proof is on you. And you end up being the person that's on the hot seat. And I am very well aware of that. And when I made my song Baby Girl, one of the things that I was told by the person I wrote it about, initially I didn't want to perform it because I do my songs, even the most meaningful songs just become part of the set. And when I wrote that song, I didn't perform it for a while because I didn't want it to just be part of the set. And I asked the permission of the person I made it about because people were coming to me and saying, women were saying, that song is about me, and they tattooed it on them. And there's TED Talks where women are talking about that song. And then there's also men or just partners of survivors would come to me and be like, yo, you really nailed what it's like to love somebody who is going through the healing process of sexual trauma, sexual violence. And so I asked the person, that I wrote it about, can I do the song? And what do you think about that? And how would you feel about that song being performed? And the answer was like, yeah, you should do it. And then they were there, and then I had to do it with them in the room. And one of the things that I said, how do you feel about the fact now that you've been in the room? And the person said, it's really painful for me to hear that song. Like it's not fun for me to hear that song. But I know it's a type of like clean pain. There's clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain is when we lean into the realities, the uncomfortable realities, in a way that heals them. Dirty pain is is the pain of escaping them and pretending they don't exist. So escaping. They said, and when you do that song, after people saying, not believing me, that room full of people is singing with you, and they believe me. And not only do they believe me, but they believe everybody else that has gone through that. They believe us. They're because the people sing along when we do the song. The whole room sings along when I do the song. So that and because of that, that's the reality I sit in every time I do a song. Now that's just a song, but I say that to say that this is why I don't like just dismissing something like cancel, saying it's just cancel culture, and it's just wrong, and it just sucks, and it's just stupid people trying to get even. Okay, let's always deal with fellow human beings that are grappling with the ugly, with the absolute evil and horrors of the world and of the society that we live in, and also dealing with the human condition. Let's deal with each other based on the best possible intention and the best possible motivation. And so when stories like that are told, it's like, man, people have not been heard. People have been gaslit. One of the most evil things that we can do after something happens is to gaslight somebody. And that's where so much of the trauma comes from. Is like, okay, so something happens. You get two different people. Like the actual event is not the trauma. The event is an event. The trauma usually is bigger than that, and it's more, it's spread out over time, and it starts to impact a person's being. And so much of that traumatic reality, that like lifelong wound, is related to what happens around this thing that happened to me. I'm supposed to be safe when I'm in these situations. I'm supposed to be safe, whatever, with my uncle, and I don't say whatever to say it's not important, but there are so many I'm supposed to be safe with my uncle. I'm with my family. And then something horrible and confusing happens to me. And suddenly I'm not safe with my uncle. So am I not safe in the world? Because if I tell people and they believe me, and suddenly my uncle has to go to therapy, and suddenly we've got new protocols that happen in our family, and suddenly people are talking to me and people believe me, then I was right to think that I'm supposed to be safe. This becomes the world I live in. That's right, you were supposed to be safe. And this was a violation. This wasn't normal. This was a violation. What happened to you was wrong. That's not what's supposed to happen. But if it's like, oh, you're lying, why would you say that? Are you sure? What did you wear? What did you drink? What were you so and so? Like, you know, or if it just never gets addressed at all, then the world that I live in is a world where that is supposed to happen. That is normal. Like, that is part of life. You know what I'm saying? And that's so much of what contributes. So I say that reading these things when they came out on Twitter, it's like, this is one of the realities that's at play here. And that just can't be denied. That, you know, regardless of whatever opinion we have, it's like people are experiencing an additional pain that in some ways is more insidious than the event itself. Or for some people, it's not an event. For some people, it's a prolonged thing, you know? And people don't, and I mean, the public understanding around trauma and sexual violence is just really low. People don't understand. So like, well, why didn't you say anything? This was 10 years ago. Why didn't you say anything then? It's like, I'm sorry, you don't understand how this works. Well, why did you choose to stay in that? Why didn't you leave? Well, again, you don't understand how this works. And I'm not an expert on it either, but I know experts and I know people that have lived through this. And I know the ring of truth. There are certain things that just have the ring of truth. So that is a reality. Now, it's also a reality. And being emotionally mature means being able to hold more than one reality at a time. It's also a reality that accusing particularly Black men of sexual violence has been a tool, a weapon that people have used particularly against Black men and accusing men of things. So when there's a defense to that, so when somebody says like, oh, you know, they're accusing this really prominent Black man of having done these things, the defensive nature in people is also understandable. I understand that as well. I'm saying we all know, or we should know, the story of Emmett Till. You know, Emmett Till was a kid from Chicago, a young guy. He was like an adolescent youth. Went, you know, to Mississippi, I believe. Forgive me, I didn't like look this up beforehand. But they say that he whistled at a white lady, a white girl, and these grown men captured him, kidnapped him, beat him to death, and left him in a swamp. They pulled his body out. His head was, forgive me for saying these triggering things, but they pulled him out of the water and his head was like 3 times the size. And his mother made the decision that I'm going to have an open casket funeral for my son, and I want the newspapers to come and take this picture. I want them to see. I want them to see what they did to my child. And that was an extremely loving and courageous and extremely probably painful thing that she did. And then years later, that woman on her deathbed or in her elder years admitted that she lied. He didn't actually do that. You know, there are cases of in interracial dating and interracial sexual relationships, for example. It's just common wisdom, common experience for Black men to, like, if you're dating a white girl, that probably some elder woman in your family or some elder in your family would be careful dating those white girls. You know, because the thing is, like, if something goes wrong, you know, if she becomes ashamed or embarrassed or hurt or something like that, that is also a reality. That's also a reality that has gotten people killed and ruined lives and destroyed legacies. That's also true. What's also true is that what happened in kind of as that progressed is a lot of the people who started coming forward were telling stories that were not so cut and dry. And when I say telling stories, I don't say that they were sharing experiences. They were speaking their truths. I don't say that to diminish them in any way at all. And if anything that I'm saying sounds that way, then that's an oversight on my part. It's a blind spot on my part. And so part of what's going on here is that, and what started to happen is like some of these accounts, some of these narratives, some of these, people sharing, some of the accounts of experiences started feeling much more nuanced, where it's like these are really kind of like not so black and white areas between people that sound like there's a potential that there could be misunderstandings here. There's a potential that this could be, like, what's the level, where's the line where we start saying like, okay, these things are actually offenses that should be dealt with, and these other things are like personal experiences where maybe somebody was crappy to somebody else. Maybe somebody was really uncaring and unloving and unaware and, not present. And maybe somebody was actually really hurtful. Like maybe someone really actually hurt somebody's feelings, but started to get really murky there. And so people started sharing things. And what happened next was a kind of like it was kind of an unraveling of a community where the main people that were talking on, and all this is happening on Twitter, and it's all happening when people can't be face to face, and it's all happening between people who know each other and have lived together. One of the main things that was so challenging for me about this thing is, and maybe I'll talk about this a little bit in a second. Again, I didn't plan this out. I'm just speaking. But one of the things that was very challenging to me is people who said things that like not even talked about experiences they had, but in this next phase, people who know each other, who have each other's phone numbers, and nobody spoke to me. Nobody asked me. Nobody challenged me. Nobody interrogated me. Nobody questioned me. Nobody gave me the opportunity to explain something. Nobody reached out to see how I was doing. Nobody reached out to say, like, this is what's challenging for me. Can you help me understand this? Or I'm upset at people, or I'm upset at you, or I feel like you've done something wrong, or I feel like you should have done this differently, or I wish you would say this, or I wish you would do this thing. Or how does this work? Or why is this happening this way? Or just F you, man. Like, I don't mess with you anymore. I'm not aware, at least for me, but then also other people that I asked when I spoke about this after it happened. The people that were talking about you, did those people talk to you? And I'm not talking about people who felt like they were victimized or violated. I'm talking about the next phase of this thing was that artists, aspiring artists, people that were in the scene, that like their identity was tied up in them being people in this scene, in this small town music thing, where, this particular music scene is, the most kind of popular thing that's cracking. And so if you're a person in the scene, whether it means that you make music or you write about people or you do videos or you're a connector in some kind of way, or you just have a Twitter that's followed by a lot of people, or, you have been a romantic partner there are people that are like lifelong, their romantic partners have all been people from the scene, prominent people that are on stage in the scene. That's the way that scenes are, you know what I'm saying? That's the way that circles are. So those people started to form a narrative that just made a lot of assumptions. And those assumptions included things like this phenomenon of women being unsafe and violated and, is unique to the music scene in Minnesota. So This is not just it's a Minnesota music scene problem. It's a Minnesota hip hop scene problem. I don't see evidence. That's just something that just doesn't feel true to me. And beyond that, specifically, that anyone that created institutions were actively upholding a system, actively and knowingly upholding a system where women were being harmed. And they specifically targeted the two successful record labels and the prominent artists, in those circles. And not and some of those artists, there had been folks with accounts of experiences that they had with them, or some would say accusations. Some of those artists, there were accusations like that, but most of them there weren't. A lot of them there were not. And so there were people that the focus started to be, and again, the ones that really made that the focus, what I experienced and observed and witnessed is that those weren't organizers and activists doing that. It wasn't the well-known, like, lifetime career people in organizing or activism or truth-telling that worked with community organizing. Those weren't the people that were saying it's these record labels' fault. And I mean, we're talking about, it was anybody prominent that had kind of moved beyond just being in the local scene. Anybody that toured, anybody that had a national and international following, those were the people that were being, was like, we're going to call you to account. And it really feels to me, and so that was happening from people, not from organizers or activists. It wasn't, none of my activist organizer friends and mentors and people that I was looking at were saying, this is a problem in the Minnesota music scene, and these prominent institutions or artists have been upholding this, and that's why this is happening to women. People are being made safe to do this because of men in these particular organizations or these artists. Wasn't activists saying that. The therapists that deal with this stuff, they weren't saying that's the case. Women who had been doing the music, had been in the music scene for a long time. Like, I know women who are artists and organizers who for years, and I'm going to mention one person by name because this is the one person that I saw actually say something positive about me publicly. So maybe I'll mention her in a minute. Again, I didn't plan this, but I saw, there are women who had years of women hip hop festivals, Minnesota women hip hop festivals. It was a joint called B Girl B. And other women that I could name. And again, I'm not trying to name names because these are people that have been doing this work actively, have been fighting for, advocating for, creating platforms for, have been training, have investing, have been, acquiring resources for women artists and women in these spaces, have been fighting for this stuff actively. Those aren't the people who said that it's the Minnesota music scene and it's the artists and record labels and institutions. They're the ones that should answer for all of this. It wasn't them. And honestly, I didn't even see the survivors or the people who had accounts that they were sharing publicly. I didn't see those people, especially in the beginning. But there may be exceptions to that. You know what I mean? There may be exceptions to that. But so then there was hashtags, boycott this record label, dismantle this record label. And one of the ones that they said was boycott Rhymesayers. Now, like I said earlier, I was on Rhymesayers for 20 years. And Rhymesayers means a lot of things. To me, what's most important about what Rhymesayers means is the loving, like, network of people who have done our life's work together, who are like family to each other, and we love each other. And the music that we made together, and the shows that we did together, and the tours that we did together, and the stuff that we built together that we could share with other people. And that stuff, to me, there is never any questioning that. Like, if anybody that ever saw that as something true, in my heart and my mind, that is and will always be true. And I love those people. And but Rhymesayers is many things. Rhymesayers grew, it started as just a collection of friends that grew into, that collection of friends that support each other grew into an official record label. And then as a record label, it became a business. That little record store that just used to be dusty piles of records with, DJ Abilities is supposed to be watching the cash register, and you go in there and you're just watching DJ Abilities practice his DJ set for 2 hours and watch TV. You know what I'm saying? And it was a place for people to hang out. That turned into a boutique looking record shop. Something that you would see in a big city because it grew into something that no longer resonated with me. You know what I'm saying? The festival that started out as like, the first couple, they did like rave style overnight joints. I wasn't there for those. But then when I started knowing Soundset, it was an event at First Avenue, the only hip hop events that you could go to at First Avenue. And we were going to these things and we were seeing people from all across the city, not only on that record label or in that crew, but we're seeing all these people. To me, that was Soundset. Then it turned into, Little Brother and Dilated Peoples and Atmosphere in a parking lot. And then it grew from that into an enormous festival. None of these things I had anything to do with in terms of like, what I'm saying? I'm an artist on the label, but those all grew into things that no longer spoke to me. But it's the way that business often works. Doesn't always work like that, but oftentimes businesses start as a mom and pop community thing, small group of friends, ragtag thing. And to be sustainable, what the standard wisdom in business is that you're going to grow into something that feels more organized and therefore more corporate, and it starts to take on a more kind of like corporate culture in a way. And those things weren't resonating with me. And I was also struggling. But it's confusing to people, like when people were saying boycott Rhymesayers, like what is Rhymesayers? Because I think people were confused about that. I was confused about that. When I came around, it was this idea that this is a collective. And so my whole kind of understanding with that thing was like, we all own this together. And at some point along the way, I realized, I don't actually own this label. And I never owned any part of the record label. And I never made any decisions. I didn't really even have a vote, and I never got profit sharing. So like the profit from other artists, the profit from Soundset, the profit from the merchandise, Rhymesayers merchandise, the profit from the record store, the profit from the festival, none of that stuff. I didn't own shares and I didn't get profit from any of that stuff. I didn't profit from any of that directly. It was really cool to be around and all that stuff. It was really I'm grateful to have been part of those things. But I didn't profit from those things directly. And also I learned that I didn't have a vote in the label in terms of what the label did with regard to anything outside of me. So I never had any vote over who gets signed or what their deal is or what happens with their careers. And the artists don't really have that. And also who got dropped or statements that were made in the midst of all of that stuff. I didn't have a vote in those things. I just didn't. What I did have is like I was an artist on that label. And what I will say is that I was supported in saying whatever I wanted to say and in pursuing whatever I wanted to pursue. So I come from the world of community organizing and activism. I don't come from and religious and spiritual community. I come from a community that comes out of the Nation of Islam. I don't come from the business world. I don't come from the corporate world. I didn't graduate from high school. I worked for UPS, but like, what I'm saying? I never was a corporate person. I didn't really have like, clean cut jobs. I'm a community person. I'm an artist. I am an organizer, activist, spiritual, congregant, imam. That's my entrance into things. So there's ways that I wanted for that organization to be in community. That was my vision, and it wasn't shared. You know what I'm saying? Like I wanted to show up in community in a certain way. And it's like, okay, well, you're not going to dictate or even direct what the organization does, what the record label does, what the festival does. Although they did a lot of really great things. You know what I'm saying? I'm here to speak on myself. They did a lot of very, very cool things. And it's for other people to speak on what they did. But I witnessed them doing a lot of things that were in private, that a lot of really, really great, powerful, important things in private that were for others and were for organizers and activists, et cetera. So I had the right, though, to say and pursue whatever I wanted to do. And they really supported me in that. Like I said, there was a manager on that label that got a 4S one time because of being my manager and because of the fact that somebody in that system was mad at me that I wouldn't give him a name. So he went and found his name and put him on the list, and he got 4S. It was only once, but it happened. When I was trapped in Iran, or when I was like stuck in Iran and was like trying to get out, because I didn't know they were going to put me on TV rapping, doing Uncle Sam Goddamn. I didn't know that. And maybe I'll tell that story someday. But I reached out to them and they helped me. Even though when I said, I'm going to go perform at a Black Lives Matter thing, or at a thing about Black human rights in Iran, folks were like, yo, you're really going to do that? Is it safe? And I'm like, I think so. They supported me. You know what I'm saying? And then when I got in trouble, they helped me. And every time that I wanted to say something, every time that I wanted to go out on my own volition and speak these truths, or when I challenged the newspaper, I said, man, they're not messing with me and I'm not messing with City Pages anymore. The one thing I'll just say this, Atmosphere and the people in the office at Rhymesayers that actually make the decision about the label were like, cool, you do what you need to do. I'm like, well, what if this hurts other? No, you do what you need to do. You're doing the right thing, and we'll rock with you. Okay. When I organized against the artists against the radio station, prominent radio station, I will say, I'm not going to say the names that were on that list of who were supposed to be on that show that the radio station did invite, that I invited to be in community. There's only a couple of them that didn't sign on. Slug signed on, and he was at every meeting, and he was kept asking, how can I be useful? You know what I'm saying? So the one thing that I can say about that label is that I was always supported in doing what I thought was right. And so was everybody else. You know what I'm saying? Like all the other artists, And I'll say too that on my first album, I said the terrible F word that people say about gay people sometimes. I said it twice on my first album. And, without being canceled, without having a moment of, the community holding me accountable, I just had a moment where I, on my own growth, realized that that was a bad thing to have said. And I wasn't talking about gay people directly. This is the way that I thought about it. But I was talking about this man that was beating his wife or hitting his partner. I used that word about him. But what I learned not long after is that when you use that word, that F word, as a synonym for weak, you're co-signing the narrative that gay people, particularly men, are weak. And that contributes to people's hatred and judgment and just a bad treatment. And so I was like, dude, and I know that, whatever the Islamic tradition holds about, we've got a very particular view of sexuality, but the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, never used disparaging language about anybody. He never disparaged people. And he didn't use slurs about people. He did not speak about people in that way, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the question is, I said something, would the Prophet have said it? No, he would not. You know what I mean? So with nobody asking me to, or with nobody telling me to, I have to say that I knew actually that the head of the label didn't like that I said that. He's like, I don't like that you said it. But he's like, I don't tell my artists what they can say and can't say. He told me that in 2002. And also BK1, the producer of this podcast, he made it very clear to me, I don't like that. And I know what you think you're saying, but it's deeper than that, and I encourage you to learn more about it. He's like, I'm not LGBT. We didn't have that acronym at that time. But he's like, I encourage you to figure out some way to learn more. And we had conversations about it, et cetera. You know what I'm saying? So I was aware that those two, and I think even BK said, I don't want to stand on stage when you say that. And I didn't say it on stage. You know what I mean? And if we did those songs, I would change the words. And then later on, it was a whole thing where I made a song on I think it was my third album, where I addressed that talked about a story of the person that the dear friend of mine who actually taught me like what it's like to grow up gay in a culture and all that stuff. And then there was news stories written about it. And I also wrote something for Huffington Post about it, that I was just taking myself to account that like, this is what it means to grow. So these are things that I'm already engaged in this stuff before there was Twitter, before there was a communal outcry demanding that people do better. This is stuff that I already was working on. And I say all that not to be like, look, so I'm beyond reproach. I'm saying I'm here for that. And I was supported in that. But I can't talk about what the label did or didn't do. And so what happened to me is that I think people were like, well, okay, we're going to bring down these record labels. And it wasn't just that label. It's anybody that was successful in the Twin Cities. In fact, one of the things that happened during that time is a group of women who, for the past several years, had become successful in the music industry. These are like women that there was a singer, a DJ, a singer, and 2 DJs, Black women. They said, we're going to start our own club. And they started to do a Kickstarter. They were going to raise $1 million. And they were going to create a club for and by, and it was going to be a Black women, artists, and it was going to be a safe space that encourages this stuff. And the community started donating to them. And almost immediately, somebody started a website talking about personal interactions they had with those women that felt really personal and petty to me. But it was like, no, they're abusers and they don't represent us. And one of the things that I look for is like, man, I believe that culture and art, particularly this type of art, classical art is one thing. In the classical tradition, you memorize great works and you uphold a canon of great works. And I believe in that. That exists all over the world in the Islamic tradition, African tradition, First Nation tradition. There's certain songs that become part of the canon and you learn those songs and you learn to master those songs. That's classical art. But modern art, which includes the type of art that we do, it requires and it gets its lifeblood from new people with different experiences. That's something that I've always believed in. And I'm like, I'm only here because I had something to contribute that was new and different. And as long as I would step up, do the work, had the talent, wrote songs that mattered to people, I could contribute. You know what I'm saying? And I hope I'm bringing something to the table. The community seems to feel that way. My heroes seem to feel that way. You know what I'm saying? There are definitely people that are tattooing my words on them. They seem to feel that way. And I'm like, man, I want there to be more voices. I want to benefit, because when we're creating something together, which is what's happening in the modern and postmodern world, I believe in a pre-modern tradition, and that's what guides my worldview. But I also operate in a postmodern culture that is based on creativity. And I dig that. You know what I'm saying? That's why Adrienne Marie Brown was like, when Adrienne was on the show, I'm just like, yo, I didn't even get to We Will Not Cancel Us, really. I mentioned it at the end, but I didn't get to dive in, which is one of the main reasons that I wanted to have Adrienne on. But so one of the things that I'm looking at is like, okay, I really, this feels like it became a vindictive. It feels like this was taken over by artists who, at the very least, have a conflict of interest. So one of the things that you do whenever you are in public work, it's important to acknowledge conflicts of interest. If I'm critiquing somebody, if I'm a journalist critiquing a corporation and that corporation employed me or they pay me or they fired me or whatever, I'm supposed to disclose that, because it's just, like I said, there's all these elements that are all at play inside a human being, and a competitive ego is in there as well. And there's something about artists and the way that the music industry, the entertainment industry, forces us to see each other as competition and feel like if that person wasn't there, that would be my spot. There's no one person that I would say like, yo, you're horrible because you think this way. This is the way that we're trained and taught to think about each other, And so the fact that it was like, it got to this level that became really ugly, extreme ugliness. Somebody found a police report about one of the people in the music scene, that this person had the same government first and last name as a prominent person. And they found a police report of a person who had assaulted his girlfriend, wife, his partner, and pulled a gun on her. And the police came and took him away. And the government name was the same name as somebody in the scene. And they started circulating this police report. And it was being shared by people as though that was this person. And it's not. And nobody ever is taken to account for that. Like nobody comes back and corrects that. It's just once they discover, oh, this is a different person, we just stop focusing on that and we start. But this was a person who I don't think anybody made a direct complaint about them or had a direct story about, a personal story about them. It got to a point where it was like, well, you didn't stop other people from doing these things. And so it's your fault. You need to be out of here because you didn't stop people. Somebody made stickers. There was stickers. Somebody went and had these stickers printed that claimed that one of the artists is a rapist. And they put these stickers up in public. And this is a human being. Now, what happened? This is one of the main questions is, what are the ways, and one of the things that Adrian does in We Will Not Cancel Us is really ask the question, how are we as a community, especially people that are part of movement, going to be better than what's called the criminal justice system? And in the criminal justice system, there's certain things where, in theory anyway, you're supposed to be able to face your accusers. You're supposed to know who accused me of what. I need to know the person that said that. And in this scenario, there's just this kind of haze of general distrust, suspicion, blame over an entire community that's this community is not to be trusted. But for people to be able to face their accusers and to know what is it that I'm being accused of, and to be able to have their day in court. These are things that the criminal justice system claims to do. And, there are entire communities for whom it doesn't happen often. But if the critique is of the criminal justice system, it's well, then where are the answers to this? And so what it created was this feeling, or this kind of, there was another layer where artists and prominent people would start coming out and making public statements. Usually they would write a statement, and the crux of the statement would be, I am condemning and disassociating myself from these people. So I no longer rock with this person, and I no longer rock with this institution, and I don't support this. And, and then people that somebody may have said something about them, then they say, these apologies, and it just really gets to a point where it feels like there's nothing that feels like a right answer. It's just the only thing that I really see coming out of that is people disassociating themselves from each other. And so then what happens after that? After that moment, after that kind of, if we want to call it a reckoning, and even if we feel that reckoning was necessary, and because the question you have is well, if not this, then what? And that's a real question that should be answered. What should people do who we have this culture of violating each other? And so what should we do? But then the other thing is, what do we do with somebody? And that's what Adrian is really talking about. What do we do with somebody that it comes to light that they have caused real, perceived, or both harm? What do we do with someone who's part of our community? Because if we kick them out of the community, then where's the healing after that? Does that person die? Like the same thing that we say about prisons, like we send a person to prison. Okay, we're gonna if we say you're a bad person, that you shouldn't be part of society, and we're not gonna take into account. I mean, maybe you did the thing that we say you did, that they got you for, but then we're gonna send you to prison, and in prison we're just gonna make you suffer, and then what? But what about after that? Well, no, who knows? Well, these people are still in the world. These people are still in our society. These people are still in our culture. And you just see over and over that people they feel a sense of like pressure in that moment to just say, I no longer rock with so-and-so. What I discovered in asking questions later is that the people that made those statements about each other didn't speak. Most of the people I asked, what was the conversation like before you made that statement about so-and-so? I don't know, man. I just, they were in the wrong, so I had to do what I had to do. Okay, well, do you guys talk now? No, I had to disassociate. Man, I talked to that person. They're like, man, they threw me under the bus. So what I do know is part of the healing process is people being in community with each other and people having opportunities to do restorative justice, to to work on things like mediation, community-led mediation and things like that. And these are the things that Adrian really goes into in her book. But there was a period where, and like ended up, when I talk about my personal experience is that I ended up in this weird space of what feels like purgatory, where there was about 2 or 3 days where people would started saying, all right, Rhymesayers is the problem. But then there's a question, we're like, well, what do we do about Brother Ali? Because these are things that I've been focusing on. It's like, okay, so there were 2 people that I know of, and there may be more people than that. There are 2 people that I know of that said, well, Brother Ali lied and said that he was black. And they quoted a line from a song they quoted a line from my first album where these white boys are jumping me, and I said, I'm trying to talk my way out of it. And I said, you're lucky I'm a righteous black man. You thought I had issues now, I really had them back then. It's me alluding to the kind of like complicated relationship that I've had with race. And again, if you want to go back and listen to the first episode of this podcast called The Opening, I go into that in detail, just my own experience of like growing up as an albino and my own family situation, and then the people that took me in and cared for me. And, my parents are European. I'm a European American person. And I've also struggled and worked it out in public, and that's one of the things that I do want to say is that there's a poet and hip hop artist who's really dope named Desdemona. Desdemona is somebody I used to be close with when I was in Minneapolis a lot, and then just touring and things like that. We weren't in space together as often. And so we had kind of lost contact, but it was always a great relationship. She's actually on my demo tape, Rites of Passage. But Desdemona for many years organized a festival called Be Girl Be, and was actually highlighting, showcasing, creating platform for not just her, but for women in Twin Cities hip hop. And again, I didn't see people asking her to her advice. I didn't see her saying these record labels or these artists are the problem, and And actually, when somebody was saying Brother Ali lied about his race, Desdemona, for no reason other than it was true, she said, I've known Brother Ali since 1997. People have always been confused about what race he is because he's albino and because, and he's always made this a point of his career. He's always worked through this and talked through it. It's always been a focus, and he's never lied about it. And one of the main things I found with people it was just a couple people saying stuff about me. It's like, they didn't actually, I doubt they'll hear this and I doubt they care, But I just realized that like these are people that don't really understand these artists or what they're doing, or what their thing really is about. But the people that talked about me were people that I've known for years. And one of them in particular is a rapper who I met when they were a teenager, and they came to the open mics at Fifth Element at the record store. And me and Idea, rest in peace Idea, were heading up and hosting those open mics. And this was a guy that came in, and I taught him all kind of stuff about how to hold the mic and how to, work with the crowd, and like spent hours helping and working with. And then when I was at the height of my like success and notoriety in the Twin Cities, they asked me to be on songs, and I always did it, and I never charged them. And I put them on shows. They played the festival. They sold their music in the store. They were played on the radio show. They came up to the radio show and performed on the radio show. All of these platforms, they had participated in all of them. And this one person in particular, there was a summer that I had off. I didn't even mention this earlier, but there was a summer where I wasn't going to tour because Ramadan was in the summer. And like I wanted to be home for Ramadan. I didn't want to be on tour during a summertime Ramadan. So I was like, I'm gonna stay home. But if I'm gonna be home, I want to do something valuable. So I went to somebody I know that runs a youth center. Again, in the neighborhood where George Floyd was killed. Very diverse, you know what I'm saying? A family center, community center, but they do youth programming. And I said, what if I come in a couple times a week, and we do a program where we use hip hop to encourage creative writing. And actually Desdemona was doing this stuff. Desdemona is one of the people that I went to and was like, because, I have known her for a long time, and she actually has been teaching this for a long time. So I asked her advice, like, I'm going to teach, I'm aiming to do this. Do you think I should, what's your advice? What would you advise me to do or not do? And she gave me all kind of advice. And so I spent a summer working in the classroom of this particular guy, doing this stuff. And he was so happy. And he said, we could probably get a grant for this and you could get paid. I said, man, I don't need to be paid for this. I'm able to take the summer off. I just want to do that. But I showed up for an entire summer, and we did this project. And this is somebody who has my phone number. This is somebody I've known for 15 of the 20 years that I've been doing this. And he came and said, and he quoted this thing out of context. You're lucky I'm a righteous black man, which if you look, the next line says, you thought I had issues, now I really had them back then. Where, I talk about, this is a story from when I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, people are confused about albinos, and I was confused about what that meant. And I was being raised by black families that were basically like, you're basically black, you're just black. Albinos are black. And I've had police pull guns on me, and who they think albinos are black. And they because I hear them radio it in, 6-foot black male, 250 pounds. And they've got their gun on me. I've been pulled out of a car and with my black father-in-law, and laid on the ground in the parking lot with a gun to my head from police officers who, like, we got a call there was 2 black men that were gonna rob the grocery store. And we're just sitting out in the car waiting for our wives to come out of the store. They're in there shopping. We just came from the mosque. We tell the story in the opening episode. But we got suits on. They laid us down on the pavement in the snow in our suits. Like, we just came from the mosque. We're sitting in the car listening to music, waiting for our wives. Literally the most wholesome thing a person can do. And got laid on the ground, and they thought I was black, And so I say all that not to justify anything, because I also, if you listen to that, I acknowledged, and so on my second album, I realized, this is confusing people. My thing is confusing to people, and I'm being listened to by this white audience. And people started to write articles. Brother Ali is black. Brother Ali is an albino black man. And so on my second album, I addressed it. We didn't have YouTube at that time. There was no MySpace. There was no Twitter. You couldn't just go on your own Instagram and be like, yo, let me just clear something up real quick. So I started talking about it and continued talking about it. I was even talking about it in the quote, but this is a person who knows me and has known me and has been happy to benefit from any time, any opportunity they had to benefit. And the question that I have is like, if a person thought that something I was doing was actually causing harm, because I'm not saying, I mean, obviously, part of being a human being is that we hurt each other. And I'm certainly open. Like, you don't be European American community organizer for all these years and in like Black Muslim spaces without being taken to account and without being challenged and without being questioned and without being, that is really part of my experience in community, is being questioned. I think it's one of the things that we're here to do, or even being given advice. But at no point did these people say to me, yo, I thought you were Black, man, and I really feel like the way you're presenting yourself, and that's harmful to Black artists or Black culture or Black creators because of this, or it's, I feel like you're benefiting from this, or you're profiting from this, or you're appropriating culture, or you're blackfishing, or all of this kind of stuff. This person never said this to me, and this is a person who had access to me. You know what I'm saying? Over the years. And it's one of the things that to this day, that now, we do learning series on the Travelers Media. We do learning series. So we have like Blood on Beats about writing songs, how to do it, how to, the mechanics of it, how to write a song, but then also the spiritual reality of it, how to write songs that connect with people. We do a whole other one called Master the Ceremony, which is about how to rock a good live show, how to go on tour, and how to build a career doing it. So just literally giving people the tools. I reached out to some artists, some organizers in the Twin Cities, and was like, yo, we're going to do this, and I would like to, they have organizations working with youth, and I'm like, yo, we would like to offer just some of your students to be able to benefit from these things for free. We'll like waive and it doesn't have to be public. We don't have to tell everybody we're doing it. Or if you think you would benefit from us telling people we're doing it, we could publicize it too, or we could just do it. And I don't announce those things. A portion of the proceeds go to so-and-so. We just do that because that's how I was taught. That's how I was trained. You just always give back when and where you can. And I had organizers and even artists tell me, well, I know you didn't do anything wrong, and I know you didn't get accused of harming anybody, but the fact that you never spoke out against the people who did, we don't know where you stand, and we don't want to be associated with you. I just did shows in the Twin Cities, and I invited an artist to perform on these 2 shows. 2 sold out shows. They're already sold out. So I'm basically saying to these artists like, yo, you don't have to promote the show. You don't have to advertise it. You don't have to sell any tickets. And I offered them generous offer. You don't have to do anything but just show up and play. People don't even know you're going to be there. You're just a surprise. So you can show up by yourself and just do an a cappella. So you can do whatever you want. I'm just trying to, give people a cool night. And, maybe the people that are coming to see me might not know your music, but these are people that I know. These are people that I've taken on tour, people that I've given a platform to, that I've shared my platform with, people that I've, posted their stuff, talked about their stuff, promoted their stuff. One of them said yes, and then came back and said no. And they said to me, I know you're a good person, and I know you would never hurt anybody, but the fact that you're associated with this record label, and I never said to anybody, oh, by the way, I'm no longer on the label, I manage my own career. Because of the fact that, like, would that have helped me? I don't know. But I think my voice or me saying that would have been added to a narrative that I don't think is fair. I just don't think it's fair to say, to do that. To say, like, this mass cultural societal problem is being upheld by not only a music scene in a small American city, that's unique to this place, but that these artists or these record labels, it's their fault. You know what I mean? I'm not doing that. you know. So one of the main things that I see is and some of these main observations, I would say, is that, and for me, when the idea of having these conversations came up in a moment where I was having some hope because of the uprising, and I'm seeing people start to reveal things and start to talk about things, I actually jumped in, especially when it was about race, because I criticize groups that I'm in. I criticize people groups that I'm in, that I make decisions, and that also that my listeners are part of. So when the conversation was about race, I chimed in immediately because there was a person who, um, there was a person who had done some overtly racist stuff. And this person was being asked to acknowledge, be accountable, apologize, and they were deflecting, and there were white people defending them, and this stuff. So I just chimed in like, "Yo, this is what an apology looks like. If we're talking about this is what this person did, and this is the level of harm that it causes. This is how this person had to." And I reached out to the person and was like, "Hey, just so you know, this is what I think. This is what I think you should be on." You know what I mean? And so when it was about that, and so this conversation was one that one, and also about sexual violence, was like, yo, let's talk about this. Let's have some growth. Let's have some healing. And it feels to me like it was co-opted by people with, at the very least, by a community of people who at the very least had some very glaring conflicts of interest that should be acknowledged. If we're saying that this is about artists, and the most prominent artists were not accused of sexual violence, but the idea that like, well, you were supposed to have policed these people who were accused of stuff. And so, you need to be brought down. And then the subsequent like desire for people to just write each other off. I didn't write anybody off. There were people being talked about that know that we don't get along. Some of the most of the people that people brought stories or accounts, it's like, man, when I read this story, a lot of this rings true to me. I'm not the judge, but a lot of this rings true to me. And they're talking about a person that knows that I don't get down like them. I don't move like them. You know what I'm saying? And I never knew these specifics about them, but this is a person that I was never cool with anyway, and I never gave this person a platform anyway. Some of them, I was like, oh, these people don't know how to be with women, and they're young, and and what I would prefer, rather than drop them or rather than disassociate from them, is say like, yo, your community has said to you that the ways that you're behaving as a public person, as a person on stage, the ways that you're engaging women aren't cool. And I'm like, man, whatever, like reading through these stories, this is a guy who does not know how to be with women. Again, I'm going to say there's other layers of this thing because of the fact that also, people tend to not want to hear advice from me when it comes to moral stuff because of the fact that I am trying to be a religious person. I don't claim to be succeeding at practicing my religion. My claim is that I'm usually trying very hard to do it, and I wish that I could find it in myself to really live the Sharia and really live the prophetic code. I would like to live like the Prophet Muhammad and the people around him. I would like to live like Khadija, our mother. I would like to live like, Allah be well pleased with her. I would like the first Muslim. I would love to live like Aisha. I would love to live like Abu Bakr. I would love to live like Imam Ali, who I'm named after. I have a lot of tension around the fact that my name is Brother Ali. I'm named after Imam Ali. And one of my teachers said, don't put Imam Ali's name anywhere where it doesn't belong. So I'm like, man, what does it mean that I'm in these nightclubs all the time? And that's Ali's name. And that's also Muhammad Ali's name. But in any case, the fact that I don't do any substances other than pizza and, I'm sugar and fat, and those are substances too. But I don't do intoxicants. You know what I mean? And it plays a role in these types of engagements and in these types of relationships and experiences that people are having with each other. I don't mess with drugs. I don't drink. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. And also, I'm married and I'm trying to mind my business. When I do speak to people about this stuff in any way, people don't want to hear from me. And I'll say that there were people who were very vocal in, canceling artists or saying we need to get rid of these artists that I know gave homes to some of these people. Some of these folks lived in the homes of very vocal people that were like, those artists are accountable for what other artists did. But the people who had the most accusations are from living in this person's house, and they hung out with them, and they actually created safe spaces for them. And so I think, just on an observation level and on a personal level, I went from being a person who felt really good about the idea of the community that I was in. And I felt like that community was one that I was willing to sacrifice for, that I was willing. And the part that hurt me personally, and it no longer hurts, and that's why I'm talking about it now. I no longer hurt, and I no longer blame anybody. And I no longer have anger about this stuff. But it hurt me that in the time, especially, that none of the people who were there when I was sticking my neck out and risking my platform at the height of my career and notoriety, that I was risking that notoriety, that fame, that access to all of these spaces, to the fans themselves, that I made fans uncomfortable who had other white artists they could go listen to, and they didn't have to hear all this stuff. I performed at the State Fair. I headlined at the State Fair, which is in Minnesota, is a very big deal. And this was pre-Black Lives Matter. This was pre-George Floyd. This was maybe 2013, I want to say. So I guess it was early in the hands up, don't shoot time, but it wasn't popular at that time. And, I created a slideshow and a moment of silence at the Minnesota State Fair, which is a sea of white Minnesotans that wanted to watch a white dude rap great. And that's what they were watching, because I'm rapping great. But I had a moment of silence where it was just a blank screen, but the screen behind me was showing the names of all the people that had been, all the Black people that had been murdered by police or people like the police. And, it ended with the recent ones from Minnesota, which I marched in those things and organized around those as well. So Jamar Clark, and can't remember if Philando Castile. I don't think Philando Castile had been killed yet, but several of the people that were, killed, Black people that were killed, and they booed me. And I saw a significant dip in followers, specifically on Facebook, because that's where those kind of people like to do their social media. But I'm saying all kind of people told me, man, you're alienating your fans. I'll never mess with you again. You know what I mean? I had neighbors that I got into that show for free that lived on my block, white neighbors, that one of the things I did for them was get them tickets so they could go to the State Fair show for free, that stopped talking to me. They didn't like the fact that I did that. So nobody, except for that one person, Desdemona, just clarified that one point. That when someone said Ali lied about being Black, she said, no, I've known Ali a long time. He's never lied about it. And if you actually pay attention to what he's been saying in his music and outside of music, you'll see that he's been dealing with this head on for a very long time. And she had no reason to say that, but there are people that were there when I was organizing, when I was sticking my neck out, when I was sacrificing. And not only did none of them say anything publicly, but also people didn't reach out to me. And I feel like now I'm in a place where I don't know what those people's opinions of me are. And that, in the time, really hurt. That really felt like, man, it is a good thing that I believe in the Creator, and that I ultimately, all of the things that I did, I hope I was sincere. I hope I had the sincerity of doing that just because I wanted the Creator to see me do the right thing. Because if I was doing that for other people, I was really felt abandoned by them and felt let down by them. Now I no longer feel like that. And the reason I no longer feel like that is because in those moments, and it's one of the things that's in Adrian's book, is a lot of times we don't speak up out against it when those things are happening, when this kind of public pile-on thing is happening, because because we know deep down that we don't want the mob to come for us. When is the mob going to come for me? And it's one of the realities that I don't say this to dismiss the experience and the very real feelings of people that have been violated and been harmed. But along with that, there is also another truth that we have to hold at the same time, and that is that any of us walking this planet, if we are self-aware, we know that there is at least one thing that we've done that if everybody knew about it, they wouldn't want to mess with us anymore. We know that we all have something like that. And that's kind of what I see now as the kind of secret that undergirds that whole kind of like, I'm either a part of this or I'm silent. You know, the people that were there when I got arrested, or they're there when I was supposed to headline this big event and I had organized against the radio station that was playing me and all my friends' music on a daily basis. I used to get a tweet every single day. They're playing the Fresh Air, my song Fresh Air. They're playing Forrest Whitaker. They're playing All Night. They're playing this. They're playing that. At that time, and they were playing my friends, I organized against them and called attention to it publicly because I felt like they were embodying these kind of institutional white supremacist, anti-Black. They're playing with culture. They're messing with community. They're dishonoring, and they're not being transparent. And the difference between them and an independent, like they are a publicly owned and funded organization. They're an institution that's funded by the public, by tax dollars, a public organization. These record labels, and Rhymesayers in particular, are independent institutions that were grown and owned by people of color. And so it's not the same thing, you know. But those people didn't speak. And that's the part that hurt me in the moment. Because I felt like, man, how is this my community? That's how I felt at that time. I no longer feel that way. Because of partially of Adrienne's book. And I'm grateful to her, you know. But then the other part is like, what are people supposed to say? And there's this feel, and who can I say specifically was supposed to say something? And I can think of 100 reasons why it's not wise for them to say anything. And also the deep reality that we were not communicating at that time. I wasn't reaching out to them. They weren't reaching out to me. And when Desdemona said that thing about me, she was the one person that I know of that defended me in public. And she didn't even really defend me. She's just like, hey, that's actually not accurate. That's all she said. She wasn't like, Brother Ali's done this and this and this. But she just said, that's actually not true. If you follow Ali's music, you know that he's always talked about this. And he never lied about it. And so I called her, and the first couple minutes of the conversation, we both were kind of like sizing each other up. Where are you at in all this? Why are you calling me? You know what I'm saying? And it took a minute for us to kind of break that ice, because in that time, everybody was suspicious of everybody else, because people are disassociating, they're attacking, and it really turned into a situation where I'm like, man, people that a conversation that I would have loved, because I personally have been centering and focusing on and exploring in myself, didn't happen. It got derailed. Community that actually could have been the source of healing became a place of mutual widespread suspicion. Individuals that had the ability to act in the way a community acts instead were against each other. And people who didn't get accused of anything, people who spent their lives intending and being happy to be a person that's useful to movement, to healing, to community, that was happy to be useful. I'm happy to be useful because I'm only here because of this community. That's just not even a question to me. I'm here because of this. So if this is healthy, I'm healthy. I need this. Now it's like, I don't know. Can I be Can I be useful anymore? You know what I mean? I don't know how to engage it. So that part to me is somewhat sad. But I personally no longer feel, and I'm saying right now, anybody that said anything about me, trust me, you are forgiven. Whether even if whether you think you're right or whether you regret it now. You know, one of the people that was tweeting about me, and there was only a couple, but that person in the midst of that just announced on their Twitter, I feel like social media has become toxic for me, and it's affecting my mental health. I'm gonna go away for a while. I'm gonna actually like go out in nature for a while, and I'll come back. And so that person stopped talking about me, and I don't know if I'm the reason they did that, but they left and came back, and we've never talked about it. And so I'm saying for anybody, the people that I mentioned, the people that I didn't mention, if you're concerned that anybody that I ever felt like wronged me or should have done something or whatever, I don't hold any of that. And I say that before the Creator, that I will, I believe that there will be a real reckoning, which is the day of judgment. I believe that there will be an actual day of accounting where everything will come to light. And in that moment, and I know that when that moment comes, I am in need of grace and mercy. And I want the doors of grace and mercy to be wide open. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, those who want to be shown mercy from the source of all mercy, be merciful with creation. And so I'm saying to you and to the Creator, to the source, I don't complain about anybody now or in that time. And there's nobody that I can say should have done this or that regarding me. And I no longer feel angry about it or sad about it or anything like that. But I do have a feeling that I don't know how that community is supposed to be a community again. Maybe I just feel like that because I was part of, the establishment, as it were. And I'm looking for what's the building that's coming out of that? The people that had so much energy around tearing people down. I want to see the artists that, first of all, are making music that matters to people. But then where are the people, where are those folks in where's that energy when it comes to supporting those artists, going to their shows, buying their merch, streaming their music, showing up for them? And then that kind of gets to the thing about also the idea of an independent artist being a gatekeeper. I think there's a lot of, as always, there are things about that assertion or that notion that I understand, and I would never completely write it off. I don't think that, and I do think there's a conversation to be had there that I would love to have and that I've been encouraging and inviting and sometimes forcing on others, you know what I'm saying? But I don't think that there's as much weight to that idea of the idea that I am not succeeding in music because these other people are succeeding in music. And if they weren't there or if they weren't successful, then I somehow would be successful. I don't think that that's true. And I would say that really what it comes down to for independent artists is, are we making music that really touches people to the point where they live their life by it? Because there's no machine that can do that, and there's no machine that can stop that. And then the way that I would say ultimately underneath all of this is that our society is just really, there's a lot of pain. There's nightmare on top of nightmare, crime on top of crime, violation on top of violation, and they're not being healed, and they're just piling up on each other. And so there's an ocean of pain that undergirds the whole thing. That there's just so much pain under all of it that's very real. And nobody, not the people not the artists, not those that, came out against, telling their stories, speaking their truths, not the people that were airing things that to me feel personal, and really, again, please check out Adrian's book, We Will Not Cancel Us. But some of the stuff was personal, and it's this isn't an injustice. This is just whack. This is a whack thing that happened between people. Not those people, not the ones that said, things about me, not the ones that didn't say things about me. No. All of the people involved in this whole thing, we are all living in a society that's dealing with deep pain and isolation and loneliness and sadness. And what's required in that is being connected to spiritual, unchanging, objective, universal, foundational truth. The fact that we all, go back to the beginning of the podcast, what I said at the beginning, none of us remember how we got here, and we don't know what was here before us. We only know it because we're told by others. We all know that we are not in this self infinite. We had a beginning. Somebody started and created our life. Somebody started our journey. And those are flawed human beings. Those are finite, imperfect human beings that we owe our existence to. And they were doing something that at least was masquerading as or in search of love, even if it was harmful. People are looking for love. People are looking for connection. And all of us are going to die. None of us are getting out of this thing alive. And we're all suffering, and we're all having moments of deep sorrow. And I think the reason why fame plays such a big role in this, because it essentially is people, a lot of times these are people that want to engage a famous person because they want some proximity to that fame. Doesn't change the fact that that famous people abuse people. Doesn't make it okay. Doesn't mean that the person deserves to be violated. It just also is another one of the truths that I've known ever since I got on stage for any reason at all, whether I'm doing a talk at the mosque or whether I'm rapping or speaking or whatever. There are people that just want to be around me because they think I'm famous, and they want to have some sort of proximity to that energy, to that power, to that thing that feels like it's an idol. I think that fame has become an idol, and an idol is a false deity that is so damaging and hard and painful and harmful because and deeply criminal because of the fact that it's masquerading as something real. And I think that when people are searching for fame, whether it's the person on stage or a person that wants to be close to somebody on stage, or a person who says that you hurt me and so now I'm going to try to take your fame away, or your fame should actually be mine. Now that's the worst of this thing, but it also is part of it. All of the people that are searching for fame just got mixed up along the way. They got lost along the way into saying what we really want is love. And we're created in love. And Allah, the Creator, is the source of love and created all of us for love. We believe as Muslims that the entirety of creation, this is the way that the Muslims believe it. I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known, so I created creation to know me. And some say that the first thing created was the light of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which is the true potential of all human beings. And that light is neither male nor female. And that light is the beloved. And what we believe is that light is that Allah is the lover and that the light itself is the beloved. Habib Allah. Al-Wadud. Wadud, the source of all love. Habib, the beloved. And that all of creation was created for that reason. And that all of the human beings were created making mistakes and needing to correct, needing to repair, and being deserving of grace and mercy and love. There is no love without harm. There's no love without grace and mercy. There's no love without loss. There's no loss without love. Like all of these things are tied in together. And when we talk about the travelers, this is what we're here to do. We're here to travel together. We're here to seek meaning, to seek love, to seek beauty, to seek truth, to seek connection. That's what this whole affair is about. So, I guess I just leave with the way that we always leave, which is the prayer. I always say it in Arabic, but I mean, this stuff has meaning. It means, may you be whole. And really, we say it plural, like, may we all be whole. May you, as an individual who is also a community in and of yourself, and may all of us, as a human family, may all of us as creation itself, may we be healed, may we be whole, may we be at peace. That's what Assalamu alaikum is. Wa rahmatullah. And may you exist in mercy, because it's our nature that we're finite and that we make mistakes and we do harm. That's part of who we are. And that's one of the great mysteries. And it's one of the things that people struggle with religion. If there's a God, how come there's evil? And it's one of the things that we talk about in theology. But we say, may you have peace. Assalamu alaikum, peace, wholeness. May you be healed. May you be one. May you be unbroken. That's the prayer. Wa rahmatullahi, and may you have mercy. May we all be in mercy, be existing in mercy. Wa barakatuh, and blessed. And so that's the way we always end the Travelers Podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.